So I'd like to call the meeting to order. So I'll say good morning. My name is Adele Imrie, and I'm Chair of the Toronto Community Housing Corporation Board of Directors. Today's meeting is a hybrid meeting and is taking place in Committee Room Number 1 of City Hall and virtually using our WebEx platform. We are also live streaming on YouTube today. I would like to begin with an acknowledgement that the land we are all on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. We also acknowledge all treaty people, including those who came here as settlers, as migrants, either in this generation or in generations past, and those who came here involuntarily, particularly those brought to these lands as a result of the transatlantic slave trade and slavery. We pay tribute to those ancestors of African origin and descent. So on behalf of the board, I'd like to welcome everyone today. We've had a busy few months since we met in July. I do hope that everyone had a wonderful Thanksgiving with family and friends and had an opportunity to reflect on what we should be thankful for, given the turbulent world that we are living in right now. There was significant work done on development of TCHC's new strategic plan. The timing for establishing the direction and priorities for TCHC over the next 5 years is perfect, given that it aligns with the appointment of our relatively new CEO, who will lead the implementation of the plan. The board is responsible for the oversight of this plan, and I would like to thank the board for their participation and appreciate their thoughtful and informed input in shaping TCHC's future focus. It's very valuable, and I would like to offer my heartfelt thanks to all the stakeholders, ELT, the city, staff, and partners, and particularly tenants who have participated in this preliminary stages to provide focus for TCHC and help us to establish our strategic plan. So I really appreciate your input and the time that you've given to us. There's been many different types of engagement, and it's greatly appreciated. I also wanted to acknowledge that TCHC's United Way Committee has also been hard at work launching the 2024 fundraising campaign. And for 2 years in a row, TCHC staff have broken records for their fundraising. I think we raised $90,000 in 2022 and $138,000 in 2023. And it's one of TCHC's greatest strengths is the care that staff have for their communities and the support that we show to the United Way. It's very important for the city. So I would like to thank everyone. We have a very full agenda today, and certainly the topics have generated a lot of interest, and we have 16 deputations today. So, and we also have a number of guests who are making presentations. So I would like to move forward quickly with the agenda, but I would like to ask the deputants to be very concise in their comments and not to repeat. There's multiple deputations on a number of items, and I would ask that rather than repeating comments that have been made by the deputant before you, if you could just focus on new comments as it relates to the item. So thank you very much for that. And I will move on to the agenda and ask if there are any additions or deletions to today's public meeting. Okay, hearing none, I will ask if there are any conflict of interest that any members have with any item that's on the public agenda. Okay, hearing none, I will ask if there are items that the members would like to hold other than item number 6, which is the Ombudsman's presentation, and we have deputations on item number 7, item number 8, item number 9, item number 11A, item number 11C, and item 13, which is a presentation, and item 14 also have deputations. So other than those items, are there any other items that a board member would like to hold for further discussion?
Sorry, Adele, could you quickly, repeat the numbers that are being held?
Okay, so items number 6 is a presentation. So that's the Human Rights Ombudsman's presentation. Item number 7 is the Auditor General's item. We have deputations on items 8, 9, 11A, 11C. Item 13B is a presentation, and we have a deputation and deputants on item number 14.
Could I hold 12D?
You want to hold 12?
D and E?
Just a sec. 12, sorry?
D for David, E.
D for David and E?
Yeah,
E for Edward?
Edward, yeah.
Okay.
I was elephant, I guess, but it sounds like L. It's not E. That's the funny thing with the English. I'm teaching my 3-year-old letters. I realize.
Are there any other items that any members would like to hold? I would like to hold 11B and 13A. So, oh, and I would like to correct that item number 8 is not for approval, it is just for receipt. Okay. So, can I have a motion to approve the agenda other than items number 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11A, B, and C, 12D and E, item number 13A and B, and item number 14. Naram, thank you very much, and a seconder. Benita, thank you very much. All in favor? Perfect. Okay, so we are going to move to item number 6, which is the Ombudsman. So I will ask Kwame to come forward.
Madam Chair, we have a number of deputants on that matter. The question I have is, do you want to hear from the deputants first and then the presentation, or do you want to hear from the Ombudsman first?
No.
Who said no? Oh, okay. Well, I understood that Kwame's, the Ombudsman's comments were short, so I think we should hear from him first, and then we'll move to the deputants.
Thank you.
And Kwame, if you can just introduce your team. I lost my sheet that had this. Yes.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. My name is Kwame Addo. I'm the Ombudsman for the City of Toronto. Here at the podium with me is the Deputy Ombudsman for Housing, Luke Brown. Okay. So good morning, Madam Chair, members of the Board of Directors, and everyone joining us in person and virtually. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you about our investigation into TCHC's human rights complaint process. So briefly, I'll provide an overview of our investigation, highlighting key findings and recommendations. I'll touch on TCHC's response, explain how we're monitoring the implementation of our recommendations, and finally, I'll outline the new notice and reporting requirements under the Toronto Municipal Code. So over the last few years, my office had received complaints from TCHC tenants that raised concerns about its process for handling tenant human rights complaints. Based on these complaints, we were concerned that TCHC did not have a system in place to carefully assess and respond to the human rights needs of the tenants, and that TCH staff were potentially overlooking issues that involved the human rights of tenants. So on July 26, 2022, I launched an investigation due to concerns that TCHC lacked an effective system for addressing tenants' human rights. In terms of our findings, we found that TCHC shared incorrect and misleading information with its tenants about its human rights complaint process, including referring to a human rights office that had not been active for several years. We also found that TCHC policies and procedures were outdated and did not incorporate major changes to the Ontario human rights system that took effect in 2008. As a result, TCHC tenants were uncertain about where they should bring their human rights concerns, and staff lacked the tools and the training to effectively address them when they arose. So in response to these findings, I made 14 recommendations to guide TCHC in creating a housing environment where tenants' human rights are respected and protected. Some of these recommendations include ensuring that all information on its website related to human rights complaints is accurate and up to date, promptly updating its human rights policy and its human rights complaint procedure, developing mandatory human rights training so staff have the knowledge needed to handle complaints effectively, and creating an effective and consistent system for documenting and tracking human rights complaints with annual public reporting on complaints, data, and trends. I provided TCHC with her draft report and recommendations ahead of the investigations reports released in June 2023. And in response, TCHC confirmed its agreement with the findings in our report and committed to implementing them. So since the release of our report, TCHC is committed to providing quarterly updates to my office so we can ensure that the recommendations are implemented on time and with the urgency they require. Last year, TCHC provided updates in September and December 2023 on the progress of our recommendations. And this year, TCHC provided us with its first quarterly update to the board on July 30th, and we'll be presenting a Q2 update to the board today. So turning to the new notice and reporting requirements. In October of 2023, City Council approved amendments to Chapter 3 of the Toronto Municipal Code, and these amendments require Ombudsman Toronto to provide the TCHC board with notice before commencing with an investigation and providing the board with the investigation results before reporting to City Council, and include the board's response as part of our report to Council. So going forward, our office is committed to implementing these steps as part of our investigation process. And then in closing, I want to commend TCHC for its commitment to implementing these recommendations and welcome the progress already made. My office will continue to provide support throughout this process, and will closely monitor its progress until we are confident that the necessary changes have been realized. Thank you for your time. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
I think we'll move into the deputants, and our first is Catherine Wilkinson.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay, good. By the way, I must apologize, Madam Chair. It was me that said no. I didn't realize my microphone was on earlier.
Oh, okay.
Because typically you hear the report before you hear the deputants after the report. These past two boards and the current board should be concerned they were left in the dark about management directing staff and tenants to a phantom human rights department that no longer existed. Like the board, our tenants have not been afforded the opportunity to publicly respond to this report until now. And tenants should not be an afterthought on issues and policies that affect their lives. Today, tenants will have their opportunity to provide the board with their perspective as it relates to this report and their lived experience with the human rights complaints process. Case scenarios indicated Toronto Housing did not factor in accessibility or accommodation needs in their decision-making process, and that is indefensible. This is a violation not only of the Human Rights Code, for which housing could be legally challenged, and the AODA, Accessibility for Ontarians Act, Disability Act, potentially being fined for non-compliance. So there are real consequences. While the former tenant transfer policy had the appropriate human rights language, it was not applied in decision-making. So in essence, we had a policy that looked good on paper, but fell short on delivery. The Human Rights Code requirements cannot just be words on paper. It must be ingrained in practice every day in everything we do across this corporation. Having multiple channels for tenant complaints is confusing, resulting in tenants being denied timely procedural fairness and resolution. I would like to thank the Ombudsman and his staff for reviewing this process to ensure that tenants are being provided with a fair, equitable, and timely human rights complaints and an appeal process. I agree, Toronto Housing needs to have dedicated, qualified staff who are human rights subject matter experts where staff or tenants can go for advice. If we had dedicated subject matter expertise in-house, we would not be the subject of an investigation. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. We'll move to Chad Hammond. I understand you have a video presentation?
I do.
Okay, and is someone helping you with that?
I won't even be speaking at all until my next deputation.
Okay.
I appreciate that.
We appreciate the
Good job, man.
creativity and the effort that went into that, so thank you very much. We will move on to Miguel.
Oops. 1 second, please. Let me set up myself too. Good. I guess I'm ready to start. But before I do that, I have a little disclaimer. I'm speaking as an Indigenous man living proudly at 22 Oak Street, and TCHC is my landlord. Also, I have physical and invisible disabilities. I'm crazy, trust me. So, I want to speak on the Ombudsman report. I agreed with my brother Ahmed. He did an amazing presentation on the video. And before I forget, I want to make clear one request that it makes a lot of sense, is that we should start now identify properties where we can turn it into non-smoking units to address some of the disabilities of people who have problems with scents, smoke, etc., etc., etc. Yes, I agree that recommendations, 14 of those have been not implemented completely in 2 years. We continue extenuating coming here to these meetings in person or online. Oh, by the way, I don't see the timer. You know how many minutes I spoke so far? All right. So I just want to say that the offices of the Ombudsman does work. Here is my track on display, so you guys to see. This is me in the year 2018 with my dog, doing what I do best, protesting on the streets. So my track is my disability, mobility that I needed to get around, because I cannot ride on 2 wheels. I want to make it clear, I can't ride on 2 wheels. I'm afraid to break my hip or fall or damage myself. So my track provides me with the balance I need. So this track was hostage for 125 days. How do you explain that, TCHC? How? This is possible in 2024. You know what the answer I got? Oh, a mistake was made, Mr. Avila. We're so sorry. You know, I can't believe it that we had to go outside of TCHC procedures of human rights and ask for help. For help, my friends. This is ridiculous. So I hope that you guys can change the culture as well as how you undertake investigations. Currently, the culture that you have in place is that you talk to resident A, staff take the information, but doesn't speak to the other resident who has complained over the other resident. You don't provide the tools of resolution. You don't provide the tools of mediation. You don't hear from both voices before you make a conclusion. You only hear one side of the story. And by the way, you investigate yourselves, by the way, all the time. And what's happening at the end? Same with the Toronto Police Services. We didn't do nothing wrong. We investigate ourselves. Everything is fine. Well, that has to end, my friends. If you really want to make sure that this corporation moves in the right direction, you need to listen to the residents that have spent, myself, 14 years coming to this organization to help you, not to fight with you, but to help you. You know, and moving forward, we need to make those make it happen so we don't have to have embarrassing moments for 125 days that my bike, my trike, and my e-bike were hostages. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Any questions? I'm here 24 hours. You know me.
We'll move to the last deputant on this item, Jacqueline Yu.
Good morning, Madam Chair, Ombudsman, Directors, Management, and guests. My name is Jacqueline Yu. I'm a TCHC tenant. I would like to thank the Ombudsman for attending this meeting to share the result of his investigation into the human rights complaint process at TCHC. I feel strongly that the TCHC tenant human rights complaint process should be managed independent of TCHC staff and management. Hiring a law firm to manage a relationship with the Ombudsman does not serve tenants, nor does it meet the objective of implementing changes and recommendations from tenants themselves. TCHC should respect his findings and implement his recommendations. Tenants at TCHC, where English is a second language, are not necessarily tech-savvy or well-informed on how the company operates. More than anything, tenants need help in understanding how the Ombudsman's recommendation will be implemented to ensure tenants' human rights will be taken into consideration and protected going forward. As a result of bypassing human rights policy and complaint process, after decentralized four-pillar to regional management report not reflect in reality. No accountability and no transparency allow bypassing human rights, violated tenant charter, and tenant no legal protection, creating an inner community self-interpretation as is fit to create two types of unfair policy to attack tenants, perhaps to discriminate tenants. All executive team, including CEO, COO, everybody executive team, they turn a blind eye and that year and distance themselves from tenants' complaint. And tenants live in a fear and live in danger because we had no protection. It is not surprised that changes need to be made. TCHC management should review company policy every 2 years. My current belief is that TCHC operations do not meet its obligation under the Human Rights Code, nor protect tenants from harassment, discrimination, and making commitments that are not followed through. As someone who has through the human rights complaint process, I was surprised to learn from the Ombudsman office that my file had been closed, and TCHC would provide me with a decision letter on the matter. To this day, I have not received that decision letter. It is understandable why I'm not confident in a revised human rights complaint process being overseen by the same staff who let me down the first time. Thank you, Ombudsman. Thank you for being an outside voice and for demonstrating thank you for demonstrating for releasing your report and not provide a draft report to TCC prior to finalization. To do otherwise would be give the appearance that TCC give direction to the Ombudsman Toronto on how to draft his report. Thank you, Ombudsman, once again for your hard work and your team's hard work with deep appreciation. Thank you for the opportunity to share my comment. Thank you. Welcome any question.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the board for the Ombudsman or any deputants? No comments? Oh, John?
Say you're still waiting for a decision letter? Did you say that?
Yes, they never provide to me. They say they are going to be investigation when I bring the tenant engagement review to Ombudsman. They say we never had election. We are secret. They provide a secret outsider, not live in our building, to control our building, to corruption, to the false tenant voice, false report, and say we do it. They even falsely claim I am one of part of the collection team. They say I'm the building a member, and falsely tell I live in 21 Sullivan. I'm not. All the report were false. And one of the tenants not even live there, but they illegal sublet to, rent it to them. Those people illegal sublet to the outside people. They did not live here. Management knows it. They partner with all the illegal activity for profit. They are really corruption. But whatever we complain, they target us. I've been get trapped inside for 4 days.
How long have you lived at Toronto Community Housing?
Since 1986.
Since 1986?
Yes.
Wow.
Since Olivia Chow is in our city council back then, but I live here since 2006. But they never be that corruption until this decentralized to 4 pillars. They never be good before, but City Home is the best, but not as bad as now. The whole team of corruption, false report, false tenant voice, they select the secret people. We don't even know who is our community rep, and our building not allowed to participate in tenant engagement. But they say in report, they take the picture, everybody and everything is false.
So your main complaint is that there are tenants that have left and they've sublet the units to people who are not entitled to the units?
They don't even live there, but they live in Midtown. They use that as a private business partner with our regional management, and then they put her in a secret committee, in a TCC official record, and then they never told us who was our committee rep.
Okay.
And then until I asked from our Mayor Tory's office, and then I find out who is that person, and then the pharmacy.
I think we're getting off topic now.
You live in town. Everything is unreal. Whatever you see.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Any question?
Debbie? They're not necessarily questions for you. These are just board questions, so they may be for the Ombudsman. Debbie?
Good morning. Thank you, Adele. Thank you, Kwame, for showing up this morning. Kwame, the corporation accepted all 14 of your recommendations. Are you satisfied with the?
I'm going to ask the Ombudsman to come back to the table, so Ms. Yu, if you could move on, and.
Oh, sorry, my English is not understanding.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just so that the Ombudsman has a microphone. Thank you. Sorry, Debbie.
No problem. Kwame, I was saying thank you for showing up this morning and presenting your report. As we're aware, the leadership accepted all 14 of your recommendations. Are you satisfied with the plan that's been put forward to make amends?
Through the chair. We've received, as I said in my remarks, two quarterly updates on the implementation of the recommendations. To this point, as it was previously announced, recommendations 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, and 8 have been completed. The rest of the recommendations are ongoing. We received a copy of the draft complaints, the human rights policy and the complaints procedure, which we provided feedback to TCH on. And I believe that this policy is going to be before the board today for approval. We're continuing to work with TCHC and their senior leadership on the implementation of the recommendations. And to date, we're happy with the cooperation that we've received.
Debbie, is that answering your question? Perfect.
Yes, I said thank you. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Brian? Brian, you're on mute.
My question is to Sean. I just would like to know what additional resources you require to meet the Ombudsman recommendations so that they can be fully implemented. So just, do you have the resources that you require to achieve the outcomes?
So in responding to the Ombudsman's recommendations and as part of the 2024 budget process, TCHC proposed to add 4 additional staff, 1 lawyer, a member of the People and Culture Division who would be responsible for training related to the implementation of the new tenant complaint process, and 2 staff who would be charged with managing the complaints that we would anticipate we would receive from tenants under the process. We're currently managing through that process. We think that the additional staff are sufficient to handle the additional work that's required to respond to the Ombudsman's recommendation.
Brian, may I insert myself into your questions? Sure. Dara, have there been any consideration to what Ms. Yu also mentioned that we've heard from other deputants about the TCHC staff investigating itself? When there are complaints against management or staff, are you thinking of a third party external to the corporation?
So the Ombudsman's recommendation was that TCHC should have an internal process through which we respond to complaints and requests from tenants that are tied to their human rights. We think that we can manage that process internally, keeping in mind that we will continue to be subject to the oversight of the Ombudsman's office, where tenants don't believe that we've responded to their complaint appropriately. The training that we intend to provide to our staff on how to meet tenants' human rights in the services that we provide should mitigate against. I think that for the most part, we should be able to deal with these matters internally.
Brian, you got your hand up again?
Yes. Maybe, do we have already in our process a quarterly reporting on this?
That's one of the elements of the recommendations that we are developing at present, and it's one of the Ombudsman's recommendations that we should regularly report back to the board on the complaints that we're receiving and how we're managing them. We're working to develop metrics that will measure how effective we are in implementing the system that we're adopting to at this time.
So is that just a sub-question, whether that should be reported through the Tenant Services Committee and then to the board?
We're happy to work with the board on whatever reporting system works best, and we'll consult with the Ombudsman and make sure that whatever system we have in place satisfies their recommendation.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I think Marcel had his hand up.
Yeah, I have a few questions. Okay, when it comes to the recommendations from the Ombudsman, would this be a standing item on the board agenda so that we can find out progress and see how everything's going with that? The other thing is, when it comes to the training, would it be available for some of the board members to attend, to take the training, to just better acquaint ourselves with the issues and how things are being done? And the final one, the lady that was the last deputant, what address was she talking about? That's it.
So I can answer the first two questions. So as to the first question, as to whether there'll be regular reports back to the board, yes. There is a report on the agenda in the public agenda today, which is our Q2 update on implementation of the Ombudsman's recommendations. You'll see those reports regularly on the board agenda. The second question as to whether any directors might be able to participate in the human rights training that we're going to provide, also yes. Happy to have directors who are interested in understanding those issues participate in the training process and to get your feedback. On the third question, I don't know that we would want to share a personal address of a deputant in the public meeting.
Thank you.
Just sorry, just a quick one, and sort of as it relates to metrics, which I think would be valuable going forward. I don't know if we have this stat in front of us, but in terms of how many human rights complaints do we receive on an annual basis? Is that something that's offhand that someone has, or it can be a follow-up item? I'm just curious, like order of magnitude.
So I'm going to pass it to Katie Douglas, who's a member of my team and is working on managing the implementation of the Ombudsman's recommendations. He is leading the work in terms of our interim tenant human rights complaint process, and she can provide some information in that regard.
That on? Yep. Okay. So we implemented the human rights or the interim complaint procedure at the end of January, very end of January. So I guess we're coming up on 9 months that we've been taking complaints, so about 3/4. And we have received 79 complaints in that time. Some of the complaints we do investigate, some of the complaints we don't ultimately end up investigating because they are not human rights complaints in nature. They're complaints about customer service or maintenance issues, or there's no nexus with our obligations under the Human Rights Code. But that's what we have received to this point, and we're working on ensuring that we have metrics about, what's the basis of the complaint, on what code ground, how is it resolved, what parts of the organization are engaged in investigating it. So we'll be able to report on that going forward, but not today.
And just to add to Katie's comments, that we don't investigate through this process complaints that are unrelated to tenant human rights. That doesn't mean that they don't get addressed. Where we have a complaint that relates to a concern that a tenant has, it doesn't raise a human rights concern, it's still going to be important to the tenant to get resolution of that, and so we refer to the appropriate staff to address it. It's just not addressed through this process.
So how is it determined that what is a human rights complaint and what is not a human rights complaint?
I'll ask Katie to address that.
So we as a housing provider are obligated by the Human Rights Code to do essentially two different things, which is not to discriminate against our tenants on the basis of a long list of protected code grounds. So race, disability, gender identity, gender expression, culture, ethnic background. We can't treat tenants differently, or we can't harass them on the basis that they fit into one of those groups. So if we, for example, couldn't offer a service to one group and not to another, if that would cause one group to be treated unfairly. And we're also required required to provide accommodation to tenants that fit into those protected groups. So for example, a very simple example, if a person with a physical disability requires a grab bar to get in and out of their shower safely, that's something that we would be, in almost all I can't imagine circumstance, that we would be required to provide for them. So install something like that in their shower to make their unit work better for them. So we get lots of complaints that do fit within that sort of set of obligations. We do get some complaints where the tenant might think it is a human rights code related issue, but it isn't. And that is something that we hope to, as we do public information, or as we do tenant information campaigns and we do trainings and we continue to publish materials to support our procedures and our new policies, that we can help tenants to understand what is the difference between a legitimate complaint, but that's not to do with human rights and needs to be dealt with in this way, or a human rights complaint.
If a tenant says that they're not being listened to because of disorderly conduct in the building, and they're not being listened to, and no action is being taken because they're of race X, they can claim, and we have many X's in our tenancy, many types of races, they can claim it's a human rights violation.
Yep, they could claim, that would be the nature of their complaint, and we would then investigate it to determine, did what they're complaining about happen? Did it have a nexus with their race? Was it discriminatory? Was it harassment under the protected grounds under the code? Was it just not dealt with properly but has nothing to do with discrimination? That's part of the investigation.
Okay, so it's not exactly always clear one way or the other, obviously.
Yes.
Somebody has to make a call.
Yeah.
Whether or not this is a legitimate thing that we're going to pursue and we're going to follow it through and investigate it, or that it's kind of frivolous because, we've heard it from the same person, every month for the last 2 years.
Right. So we get the complaint. We're never getting a complaint and saying, without looking into it, to some extent, this couldn't possibly have anything to do with human rights. We have to understand the nature of the complaint. And from there, we decide, is this something that we investigate under the human rights procedure and deal with as a human rights violation, or under another resolution mechanism.
So are we tracking what's valid and what's invalid?
Yes.
We're tracking all that. Okay, thank you.
Just to add, you can imagine that the manner in which we deal with those complaints can go through a number of different channels. We may decide after consultation with the tenant that this isn't really a human rights complaint. We refer it to somebody else to deal with. We may decide that this could be a human rights complaint. We undertake an investigation into the complaint. We decide that actually that there wasn't a human rights breach that was the basis for the complaint, but still there were issues that could have been addressed. We don't ignore those issues. We still refer those issues to staff to address, even if following the investigation, we determined there were issues that needed to be addressed, but it wasn't a breach of the human rights code.
Right, and that makes sense. That makes sense. Okay, thank you.
Brian, is your hand left?
Just one further question. Because presumably the tenant or the individual has the option to go beyond TCHC, I just wondered how many complaints went beyond that to the Human Rights Board in 2023 and 2024.
It's a hard question for us to answer. I don't personally know of any that have gotten there by now. However, the Human Rights Tribunal is very, very backlogged. And so often we won't know about an application that's been filed for, 3, 4, 5, 6 months. It's very possible that a tenant has not been happy with the outcome of one of the investigations we've done and taken that route. But I am not personally aware of it. And also I wouldn't necessarily be aware of every single complaint that's come into the organization.
And as well, when we determine the metrics that we're going to follow in reporting back to the board on how we're performing in relation to this area, we can look to include in that metrics related to complaints that were initially dealt with through our process, where we've subsequently received an application to the Human Rights Tribunal about the same matter, or matters that get referred to the Ombudsman because a tenant is unsatisfied with the outcome of the work that we do internally, and we can report that back.
That would be great to include in the report back. Thanks, Darren.
Yeah.
That you do notify us and that we do have an advance review of the report. You know, we have an oversight role here, so the board can actually be a good partner for you and ensure that the recommendations that you make are implemented. So I think it's important for us that clarification was made. I also would like to stress that we are committed to implementing these recommendations and take this very seriously. I would also like to point out that, TCHC is, dealing with very complex issues. We have a number of regulations and legislation that we are bound to comply with, which makes it very difficult to, get a satisfied solution for every complaint that comes forward. So I just wanted to make sure that the expectations are reasonable.
Well, I just want to say thanks again for allowing me the opportunity to speak to you today. And I just want to reiterate that the cooperation that we've received from Sean and his team has been really good. And I'm confident that we'll be able to find a completion date with the recommendations in the not too distant future.
And the board will continue to oversee it. So thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. So can I have a motion to receive the report? Vanita, thank you. John, thank you. All in favor? Perfect. Motion approved. We will move on to item number 7, which is the Auditor General's report. I don't know if the AG is still here. Do we? Okay. So I know she had a meeting that she had to go to. Okay. So can we just have a motion to approve the report, the Cybersecurity Assessment Part 2. Vanita, thank you very much. John, thank you. All in favor? Perfect. We will move on to item number 8, which is the Q2 quarterly report to the Ombudsman on the human rights complaint process. And we have 2 deputants on this item, so we'll welcome back Chad.
Hey guys, how are you today?
Good.
So if I mess up a little bit, it's just a little nervous. Okay, so this morning, I would like to, let me use my other glasses. I would like to begin this morning by expressing my sincere gratitude to the Board of Directors, especially UBA and others on the board, for your help in asking to have reopening my medical critical priority transfer. Thank you guys, I really appreciate that. I'd also like to extend my appreciation to Kwame and the Ombudsman and his team for their proactive engagement regarding my medical critical priority transfer as well. Additionally, I would like to thank Nadia, the COO, thank you, for reopening my critical priority transfer. I truly understand everything that you've done to open that file back. And lastly, I'd like to acknowledge Lindsay Vietz, Director of Operations, and Daryl Spencer, the Manager of the Critical Priority Department, for their dedicated efforts in seeking appropriate housing that meet my needs. I recognize that this was not an easy task, and I am grateful for your support and commitment in finding me the most adequate housing. So thank you for that. My deputation on the Ombudsman regarding the Q2 2024 report. I'm here before you to address a pressing issue concerning the progress of the Toronto Community Housing implementation of the recommendations outlined in your June 2023 report regarding tenant human rights complaints process. As tenants, we rely on the TCHC to uphold our rights and ensure that our voices are heard and respected. As it stands, only 6 out of the 14 recommendations have been fully implemented. This delay is not only frustrating, but it also raises questions about TCHC's commitment to ensure that tenant human rights are protected. Transparency is critical in the process, and it is imperative that we understand why it's taking so long to complete the remaining recommendations. Furthermore, TCHC is urged to develop a comprehensive plan for mandatory human rights training. This training is essential for staff to understand the implements of updating its human rights policies, ensuring that all staff members are well versed in their policies. This will lead to a fair and more effective handling of the tenant human rights complaints process. Additionally, Toronto TCHC must commit to reporting annually to the public on human rights complaints about data and trends, establishing a robust and consistent system for documenting, tracking human rights complaints. The level of transparency will help build trust between TCHC and its tenants it serves, ensuring that we all aware of the progress being made and the challenges that lie ahead. Lastly, the establishment of key performance indicators to measure staff effectiveness in addressing tenant complaints is essential. These indicators will provide a clear framework for accountability and ensure that the human rights complaints are addressed fairly and effectively. In summary, the present delays in executing these recommendations are worrisome. We strongly encourage TCHC to prioritize these completions to prevent them from becoming stagnant. The recommendations put forth by the Ombudsman are merely suggestions and necessary step towards ensuring that tenants' human rights are respected and upheld. We call for transparency in the process and commitment for TCHC to expedite the implementation of these 8 recommendations and continue to develop its human rights complaint process. That's it.
Thank you very much. Miguel.
I'm gonna be speaking up, standing up, because maybe my friend will need at the table again to speak. I think he registered in every item. Anyway, so we're speaking on the human rights complaint. Again, disclaimer, and I'm speaking as an Indigenous man, proudly living at 220 Oak, and TCHC is my landlord. I am a man with mental health disabilities and physical disabilities. I fully agree that this process must be taken out of the corporate office into the hands of an independent body. I would recommend that anybody wants to take this outside the TCHC realm to go ahead, and hopefully you will get justice done somehow. So I want to say also that I am against the approval of any human rights complaint because the Community Safety Unit review, as you are aware, Ombudsman is aware, everybody is aware around here, the CSU review has not been completed. It's not done. So I want to repeat what I told the team, the panel. Body-worn cameras are needed for our special constables. Why? Because they go to buildings that do not have cameras on every floor. Second, it allows accountability, transparency.
We're talking about the human rights
Let me
process.
finish, please. I know what I'm doing. I know I'm addressing an
you
item
are supposed to speak on the
that
item.
has to help the human rights process that you have. Because my reasoning for being investing my time in this process is because of an issue that I have with the community safety unit. As you know, currently you don't have a plan to deal with residential noise complaints. All you do is document every single call that you receive from residents in the buildings that said, I can't sleep because somebody is going berserk in the upper floors, banging and banging and banging and banging. That's my experience. For 30 days, 35 residents of my building were not able to sleep. And every time I ask questions, what are you doing? Oh, we're just documenting. Alan Britton is right here. He can answer that question. So it's up to the property manager office, the management office, the HUB office, to say, okay, we have had enough documentation. I'm going to take it to the city, to the municipal law enforcement officers to investigate why residents are unable to sleep at night. Why don't we avoid all this process and just go ahead and call the municipal license enforcement officers who had the technology, who had the knowledge to investigate noise complaints. So that is, I want to continue add to the conversation that COTA, a service provider for mental health in 220 Oak, needs to be integrated 24 hours. Currently, we only have 8 hours of service for mental health supports. That is not enough. Our building is overrun with people with mental health and addictions. One of the projects that we discussed in 2018, and it will be hopefully addressed in 2 weeks, is an update. I don't know if I can see in an overhead. Hello, guys. Is the overhead working? Hello? Can you put on hold my time?
Okay.
Okay, there you are. So next week, I'm looking at Alan Murray, but he disappeared. We know we have plans to build 24-hour dedicated offices for COTA in the basement. According to what I found out, the building condition assessment has not been provided at my request when I make a freedom of information, because in 2018, you guys have $30 million allocated for tower renewal. But in 2024, post-pandemic times, and I agree with the CEO, the interest rates are coming down. The interest rates of this, but let me, all these things need to improve so that we don't have to go to the human rights. See, you need to invest in the buildings, in the communities, so that we don't have to go to the human rights. That is my point I'm trying to make today. And we need an e-buy policy and a buy policy for 220 Oak Street. I'm still waiting for that one.
Okay. Thank you very much, sir. Are there any questions as it relates to this item, the Q2 update on the implementation of the processes? Okay. Hearing none, can I have a motion to receive this report? Vanita?
Recommendations implemented by the end of next year, end of 2025.
Is there any resources you require that would speed that up?
Okay. So I think, clarifying, I think the intention is to try and roll out the implementation by Q2, Q3 of 2025. To the director's question around potential obstacles to that implementation, I will just make a pitch that the next item on the agenda is the TCHC human rights policy. And that is a key component of our ability to implement the Ombudsman's recommendations in a timely manner. So I would just stress that the approval of that policy at today's meeting will help us facilitate the implementation by the timeline that we're identifying in this report.
Okay. So Vanita moved. Brian, can you second? Perfect. All in favor of receiving?
2018, the Ombudsman's office conducted an investigation into the tenant transfer policy, which at that time had not been reviewed for 12 years. The policy was to be reviewed again in 2020, and that did not happen, so it's now been 6 more years since the policy was reviewed. I was a little taken aback in the management's report around the use of the word criticized when referencing the Ombudsman inquiry into how Toronto Housing prioritized tenants for transfer and the length of time it took. We should be mindful the Ombudsman is an independent accountability officer of the city, and as such, we should be respectful when referencing their reports. Many other words could have been used instead. While I understand it is a complex process, anyone familiar with the tenant transfer process would agree with the Ombudsman's findings. I'm still not sold on the centralized flowchart for the accommodation request process, and I don't even like the title. There's no indication who is responsible for the centralized transfer process, where the department fits within this organization, and more importantly, there's no indication how long the process will take from start to resolution. This is important because there's no guarantee a request will be resolved at the first point of referral, and it may be sent elsewhere within the organization.
Today, because if you approve a document with 14 recommendations and they haven't gotten the majority of them, and they have until next year, 2025, to get it done, it's going to get lost, period. If this is what's outstanding, number one, they're still protecting Toronto Community Housing staff under scope. In the definition section, they should put staff and they should put definition of employee, because they're saying staff, it applies to staff. Employees, same thing. Employees or staff of Toronto Community Housing, right? If you're talking about general managers, assistant managers, right? If these people breach your rights, they are not accountable to the charter? Absolutely incorrect. I'm saying it again. If you breach, every single person is accountable to the charter. And to have this document protecting Toronto Community Housing staff, and additionally, they had to hire a legal team to help with the Ombudsman's 14 recommendations, right? Because their legal team was not capable of doing that. And if we're going to pass, we need to amend definitions. We need to amend scope. They applied. This is what they did. They put several documents in this document, right? That doesn't even apply to the standard in which remedies are supposed to be applied. Where's the remedy? Toronto Community Housing tenants must understand if you breach, the remedies are A, especially if you breach disability. If you breach someone's disability rights, what is the accountability? What is the remedy for the tenant and the staff? Of course, they have to give you the disability installation, right? Because that would be a serious breach. But the damage and the abuse and the disrespect and the biasness that you have to go through. Remember, I'm a guinea pig and I'm a good one, right? That they are doing is unacceptable. You have the resolutions department, you have the complaints department in this document, and they're not doing their job. They're untrained, they're biased. You have persons calling your home, which you have never met in your entire life, telling you a bunch of lies, which you have to ask yourself, how did they get this lie? From Toronto Community Housing staff, right? You have the staffing team that is there lying against tenants, sabotaging programs, right? This is just unacceptable. And I'm looking through this document, right? There's no, one that's very important, directors, is the disciplinary action that can happen to Toronto Community Housing staff. This is simple. How do you make it simple for tenants to understand where breaches are? Posted in their buildings. There are 60,000 tenants. Post the information in their buildings, put it in the newsletters, put it through their mailboxes, right? So they understand what the breaches are. And the important document is, if Toronto Community Housing staff breaches your rights, this is the disciplinary action that can be taken against them. Toronto Community Housing staff is not doing any of that. What they say is, they can do nothing. They can do nothing about a breach. They can do nothing about biasness. They can do nothing about lies. They can do nothing about a staff bully, threatening, and intimidating you. And they have a disciplinary action that they can take that they're not taking because they're too friendly with the staff. So if you're too friendly with the staff, that means you cannot do your job when that person is doing wrong against a tenant. It's not the tenant's fault. It's not the tenant's breach. It's directly Toronto Community Housing staff. And when you stand up against them, they come after you, right? In any way they think they can to make sure they keep you quiet, or they try to mess with your tenancy. They try to put incorrect information in your file, right? To make it easy for them to do what? Lose your tenancy or your gear to income rent. This is all unacceptable. There's no way you guys can approve this document with so much problems in the document. I'm asking you, send it back to the table because it needs reviewing. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll move on to Chad.
All right. Again, thank you for having me here today. I really appreciate it. I would like to address the matter of the importance regarding the tenant human rights policy. It is imperative that we take the necessary time to thoroughly review the policy related to the tenant relocation program and its transfer policy. I recognize that the current stock in Toronto Community Housing's portfolio is quite limited, and I completely understand that and legal resources to other priorities and move from the responsibility from addressing these complaints directly. Furthermore, the absence of a third-party investigation may suggest an underlying unwilling to confront the possibility that numerous complaints could reveal systematic failures in upholding individuals' rights. Additionally, I advocate for hiring of a certified medical representative to be part of the updated RPath 2.0 program on an ongoing basis for medical critical priority transfers and other related accessibility disabilities. This individual would be certified medically and equipped to inform medical decisions regarding the transfers and relocation policy, especially when they pertain to tenants with health conditions and disabilities. While the RPath program has its merits, it is essential that we recognize its limitations and build off the RPath program and make it bigger and better. RPath and TCHC have to recognize that not all disabilities are visible, and this can cause a very serious tenant human rights violation. I was initially invited to participate in the RPath program, but the lack of experience regarding my case has led me to feel that it lacks the adequate support and structure needed to address the complex needs of tenants. While RPath is a commendable organization, it requires updates and deeper understanding of all types of disabilities, including those that are non-visible, as well as issues related to scent and smoke-free environments. Additionally, RPath should consider incorporating medical professionals into its program to make informed decisions about people's lives, to influence policy changes related to medical critical priority transfers and matters concerning accessibility and disability. Also, RPath should be advocating strongly to TCHC, trying to build smoke and scent-free buildings and buildings that are made especially for people with accessibility disability problems. So that TCHC can avoid any human rights violations or complaints regarding accessibility. I believe that Toronto Community Housing should never close a medical critical priority transfer simply because they cannot accommodate it or lack options in their portfolios. These cases should always remain open and prioritized based on the individual's conditions and circumstances. It is important to remember that Toronto Community Housing doesn't lose anything by keeping a file open and allowing individuals to view available apartments to determine if they meet their needs. There's no downside to taking this approach. This would avoid any human rights complaints to the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal. Lastly, I would like to emphasize the significance of what I've discussed here today and hope that the Board of Directors can implement policy change concerning the human rights complaint process and the redevelopment of an RPath 2.0 for everyone. This will ensure protection of the human rights for all individuals. That's what I have. And also, I'd just like to say as well, Sean I've seen him 2 weeks ago, and I was letting him know as well about where you can allocate money from ODSP. ODSP, we talked about that you guys are only taking 152 when you guys can be taking the number is 556, I believe. And that's an extra 404 that you guys can be getting to put towards those programs of building scent and smoke free for your allocation to whatever projects you guys have. That's major, because outside, any landlord outside would be taking that 552. You guys should be no different than taking it from the Ontario government. I mean, at the end of the day, 152 from me, 404 difference. You have a family of 4 or 5. That's more money, and then we can allocate that money to other programs. So yeah, that's what I have for today, and thank you very much. I really appreciate the time for having me. Thank you, directors. Thank you so much. And Nadia, really, I really do thank you for reopening my file. It was really good of you to do that. Thank you so much.
Our next deputant is Kathy Birch.
Good morning, and let me say, good timing, because I need to clarify something for previous deputants. First of all, RPath is external to this corporation. This board, this management team has no governance in RPath whatsoever. They have no control of us. They don't determine what we investigate, what we pursue. We work with Toronto Community Housing to create and better an accessibility program. We work with the teams. We worked really hard to build those relationships so that we could do better for tenants. But there's not going to be a 2.0, and Toronto Community Housing is not going to tell RPath what to do or what not to do. That's never been the relationship. That's never been the respect, and it's not going to be. I created RPath because people with physical disabilities their needs were not being addressed in Toronto Community Housing in 2013, and we developed it externally only. So for the previous deputants, please be aware they have no governing factor at all over the committee I created. So aside from that, now getting to my actual deputation, if you don't mind. I won't repeat some of the things that the other deputants said.
Appreciate that.
But I will speak to this. The policy speaks about procedures for accessibility accommodations, but does not identify where those procedures will be made available to tenants, either on the website and or in person for those who do not have internet. The procedures cannot be available for staff only. It has to be available for the tenants as well. And it has to be in writing, and it has to be available in multiple languages if that's what they need. And because we have many tenants who apply for medical accommodations when they really need accessible because the definitions aren't there, the procedures aren't there. And I know I'm going to hear, oh, but you don't put procedures with policy. You absolutely can as an attachment. So before you argue with me over it, Dara, please be aware that I'm well aware of the fact that it can be attached. And a lot of times when it's not right up front, our staff are not applying it consistently and evenly. Tenants don't know which one. They're applying for the wrong thing, and they don't know where to go. This needs to be available to tenants. That's why the mistakes are happening. And it can't, and policies can't be applied consistently. So we need those procedures with specific definitions and step-by-step directions. That'll help give not only more informed tenants, but our frontline staff don't know the difference between an accessible accommodation and a medical. So let's give them the help they need. Put it where it's available so that everybody can say, look, this is what it says we're supposed to do. Let's do it. And it manages expectations and we'll move forward in a better way. We need the transparency as well. This corporation's lacked transparency and consistency for a long time. And if we do better at trying to tackle those two major features, we'll all do better in a lot of areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Birch. The last deputant on this item is Jacqueline Yu.
So yeah, yes, okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chair, directors, management, and guests. My name is Jacqueline Yu, and I'm a TCHC tenant. The board should not approve the tenant human rights policy today without seeing the procedure and timeline that will be used to improve tenants' complaint. I have two examples. TCHC does a great disservice to tenants when it does not address a tenant's right to peace and enjoyment of their unit in a timely manner. This puts tenants against each other, creating avoidable tenant dispute. TCHC needs to improve the process and be more responsive and respectful when receiving such complaints and upholding their obligation as our landlord. Often, noise complaints are from neighbors or non-tenants. Sending tenancy management letter is not effective in resolving the issues. This allows the tension to continuously to escalate between tenants. This is a serious area of concern for all tenants across the portfolio. And also can lead to tenants have to take TCHC to the landlord tenant board to have their right upheld. Often, tenants feel pushed to the edge, particularly those English is a second language, and feel there is no space to voice their concern. Multiple complaint channels are difficult to navigate, and when complaints are escalated, it can feel like staff close ranks and all agree with the original decision, leaving the tenant feeling disrespect and their complaint irrelevant. Community space consideration must be given to tenants living in the ground floor unit when outdoor area directly in front of tenant's unit window should not be designated as community garden space. For the tenant on the ground floor, this dispute the tenant's right to peace and enjoyment and inside their unit and invade their privacy, particularly. I recognize not approving the human rights policy before you may create some internal setback. However, we must keep in mind it is a tenant policy and ultimately you need to meet their need as well. Thank you for the opportunity to speak before you today on this important tenant human rights policy. Thank you. Happy to answer any question.
Thank you. Are there any questions as it relates to this matter?
It's Debbie Adele.
Hi, Debbie. Yep. Go ahead.
I had put my question in the chat, but I guess nobody's paying attention.
Oh, sorry, I can't see the chat.
Yeah, no problem. Did we share the draft policy with the Ombudsman's office? Yes. For feedback? I think he referenced that when he was responding to my earlier question on another item, but I wasn't sure. Dara?
Yes, I can confirm that it was shared with the Ombudsman prior to its being final.
Not what it's based on?
I'm understanding that they haven't been incorporated, but I don't know the significance of his comments.
Believe that there's anything in the policy that would conflict with the Ombudsman's recommendations, but Katie, can you add?
Great, there's nothing in the policy that conflicts with the recommendations. The Ombudsman's reviewed the entire sort of suite of policies and procedures that we've put out that support this human rights policy. And those policies and procedures, if they need to be amended, can go back to ELT and be amended.
So it's not like we have the Ombudsman's investigation and we're writing a different set of policies. Policies are based on the outcome of the Ombudsman investigation quite clearly and his recommendations, correct?
Yeah, they've all been drafted in line with
So, yeah.
yeah.
So there's really no need to hold this up for another round then. It's in compliance, I'll say. Is that your opinion, Mr. Baird?
Yes, through the chair, the policies were drafted in direct relation.
The Ombudsman is not here. Okay, so there are staff here.
Thank you.
Thank
you. Could please identify themselves?
Yeah.
And I understand that we can only hear from the Ombudsman on these issues, so now I'm confused.
Luke Brown, I'm the acting deputy ombudsman for housing. And
Sorry, my understanding is that we can't hear directly from anyone except the Ombudsman. So could you clarify that, please?
well, the ombudsman was here earlier, and unfortunately he had to step out. So I'll do my best to answer if I'm able to on his behalf.
Now we have a little problem, which you know what it is.
I'm sorry, those of us online, we're not understanding what the problem is, why we can't hear from the acting director for housing from the Ombudsman's office.
Because it's my understanding that we don't have access to the deputy. We only have access to the Ombudsman.
It is difficult to know how to move forward with that response because we don't know how substantive or not the feedback was. Right, so if it's cosmetic in terms of how they present information, that's one thing. But if it is substantive input in terms of what the policy should say, then I would want to see that incorporated.
So what I can offer through the chair is we will continue to work with the Ombudsman as we implement the procedures that we would adopt pursuant to the policy, to consider their comments and to determine how we can best incorporate those comments into the steps that we take, the documents that we develop and post for both staff and tenant. We are committed to getting this right. As has been pointed out, the comments that the Ombudsman provided, I think the timing I've got is last week in relation to the document, were provided once, as the board knows, this document was before it in July. So after the document was presented to the board initially, but we'll continue to work with the Ombudsman as we implement the recommendations they provided to us under as a consequence of their review of our tenant human rights complaint process and generally to ensure that we're meeting our obligations to tenants under the code.
I appreciate that, Dara. Have you and Kate, would you and Kate classify the feedback as substantive, or what would you say? I'm assuming you're both taking a look at it.
I don't know if the deputy can you speak to whether your comments were substantive?
With respect, I think this is probably not the best forum to engage in this conversation.
Okay.
I would prefer to hold off at this point.
Yes, we understand. That's why my question was to Dara and Kate, not to the Ombudsman staff.
As I say, we will continue to work with the Ombudsman to address both substantive, procedural, and other comments that they've provided in relation to the policy to ensure that we get it right.
Appreciate that, Dara.
Okay.
So,
Brian?
Just on Debbie's work, can we approve this sort of, I guess, in sort of principle, but have it come back to the next board meeting with making sure all the comments from the Ombudsman's office has been included, so we can update it to make this an iterative process. And also add, I think a couple of the deputants were talking about policy, procedures and processes should also be included. So, I mean, as we move forward, hopefully we, as the board, can have those brought back to us to be presented to the board. So not wanting to slow anything down is to sort of approve this in principle with the understanding that this is a process that is going to continue on and with further adjustments.
I agree. We treat it as a living document. Yeah.
Treat it as sorry, Debbie, I can't. Living.
We treat it as
a living document. Something.
A living document.
Okay.
An evergreen document.
Yeah. I mean, we don't want to stop the process, but we want to keep it going and not.
Yeah. Nick?
Yeah, just a quick response on that. Like, I think we either have to approve it or not approve it. I don't think there's an approve it in principle and so on. And all policies have an opportunity to be updated over time as relevant and meaningful updates should be considered. So from a moving forward perspective, I think it's approve it or not, or defer it.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, Paula, did you have your hand up as well?
Yes, I can you just remind me, it was here in July, and then what the pathway has been for this policy, please?
It was here in July. It was deferred because board members requested that it come back along with supporting policies, so the tenant transfer policy and relocation policy. So it has been resubmitted along with those additional supporting policies, which I will comment have not been updated in the same way that the human rights complaint process has. So they are our existing policies.
They're existing policies, so they're all here basically for that discussion. It's a companion policy to those other ones. And then the Ombudsman was asked to comment on the policy. Sorry, I was not clear on that.
That's correct. So the policies were shared with the Ombudsman's office, and they've provided feedback on the human rights complaint policy.
And when were they shared?
I'm sorry, it's hard to hear if you don't talk in your microphone.
Last Friday, a week ago.
Friday.
Shared them with the Ombudsman, or you got comments from the Ombudsman?
We got comments back from the Ombudsman last Friday.
And when did you share them with the Ombudsman?
Comments, that would mean a rewrite.
When I shared them, I'd have to go back and look at my email. I can tell you.
Okay.
There's nothing you're flagging here that would say we're on the wrong track, you've made a big mistake.
Yes,
that
and we've got Sarah's
basically we're in
commitment.
compliance with the investigation, compliance with the direction, and no big flag, no call to your office.
Through the chair, that's precisely how I would characterize it. I will say that the comments that we received from the Ombudsman's office are suggestive into how we can enhance and strengthen the policy, and those are helpful. And we will be happy to work with their office in strengthening the policy.
Great.
However, there are important steps ahead of us that are dependent upon moving forward with the policy, including the training activity, including other recommendations that have been identified today as being outstanding. I believe it's very important that we be able to move forward, and happy to provide the commitment that we will continue to revise that policy as appropriate and bring that back here for further discussion.
Well, as the Ombudsman has indicated, he'll be meeting regularly with TCHC. So would that not be part of those conversations?
Through the chair, the policies have been regular parts of our quarterly conversations, yes.
So if we don't do this today, then we still don't have a policy, we don't have a plan. So the training and everything else that's contemplated can't start if we put this off for another 6 weeks or so, correct? That's what you're telling us?
That's correct. There's a number of elements in the recommendations that are dependent upon this. Training is one, the metrics and KPIs and reporting back are another. There's quite a few pieces that.
I just want to be clear, there was no big red flag that came into you that said, hold on, you can't do that, this is wrong. Because we have two companion pieces here today. We have the investigation and we have the policy that are sitting together at this meeting.
Through the chair, that is my interpretation, yes. There was no large red flags, but there are meaningful and helpful suggestions that we can work with.
Yeah, for implementation, yes.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just have another question. Deputants have mentioned there's a conflict of interest if somehow we have a first layer of looking at our human rights complaints. And I don't think, does the city have an external if you have a human rights complaint? I think it's pretty general that unless it's escalated and it's a very critical issue, that then you bring a third party in. But other than that, what's the typical procedure for human rights complaints in an organization? Looking at HR, looking at legal?
So from an HR perspective, I know that the city has its own internal process to deal with complaints related to tenant or employee human rights concerns. The direction from the Ombudsman is that we should have our own internal process, and we're
Just
implementing that.
asking about
that.
others, not about us. So hydro, so parking authority, is there an external agency that's been put on any other, that's one question for a city. Does Wood Green, do other housing providers, do they have to have human rights? Because if they have RGI tenants, do they have to have a human rights policy, and how do they?
Organizations may take different approaches to how they address that. They may have a client ombudsman to address those kind of concerns, but every organization should have a mechanism internal to itself through which it responds to tenant, customer, employee complaints. Whether that's an ombudsman or a human rights complaint process like we're adopting at the ombudsman's recommendation.
Thank you. So I just want to clear up, is there a conflict of interest? Because that's a pretty deep charge that you would have a conflict of interest looking into human rights complaints. And I want to have that very clear. And if we need to take that to the city solicitor, I'd also ask that. So we have a validation. If that's not the case, then I want that validated. So all the tenants that have come today and mentioned that there may be a conflict of interest, understand completely that if there is, that's one thing, but we're validated that there isn't in the process that we've set out.
So through the chair, I would suggest it's not a conflict of interest. In fact, it's an obligation that we have these responsibilities internally, and there exists other outside entities that can assist tenants should they wish to seek those out, including the Ombudsman and including the Human Rights Tribunal.
Correct. I believe so, but I'd like to have that. Just want to see, because I think it's a very deep charge. When you say someone has a conflict of interest, it might seem like a simple thing, but it's a very deep charge, knowing what that means as an elected official, so.
And we can confirm, but we've heard at this board meeting that sometimes, for example, issues that a tenant may have about the service that they proceed need to get escalated before they get resolved to tenant satisfaction.
Correct.
This is really no different than that. We need to have mechanisms internally to the organization through which we can address and respond to concerns that tenants have that the service that they received at first instance wasn't the service to which they were entitled. That's what this is trying to do.
Their ability to go to the Ombudsman.
Or the Human Rights Tribunal.
Or the Human Rights Tribunal, because we've got a housing office there. Can I just ask one more question? So under our policy, we're going to process all these complaints in a better way because it was found that we weren't doing that well. We got away with the website 2017, et cetera, et cetera. But does it all mean that because we have other accommodations that are part of the requirement of being for RGI tenants in particular, that is our transfer policy that has to do with a number of other features. How will we mesh human rights related complaints or requests for transfers against victims of violence, all of the other measures that are actually not our internal? They have to be approved at the city level, and I don't think everybody understands that either. That the transfer policy and who's being transferred under special circumstances. Let's be clear on that first. Our transfer policy and who gets transferred under special circumstances, we may have that, but it's also corroborated through the Housing Secretariat. It's not our final call. Is that correct? Do I have that wrong? The list goes up. There's Mr. Rollins. Let's hear about that.
Thanks for the question. The internal transfer policy is the TCHC is responsible for their own internal transfer policy. The city, through the Housing Services Act, sets two priorities, one being SPP and one being overhoused. And at that point, TCHC is responsible for the bulk of the rest of their internal transfer policy as well as enforcing it. So the city actually doesn't have any direct say on the internal transfers until such time as they're overhoused for more than 24 months and come over to the wait list.
So can you just tell us what the overhouse and what's the other one that you're regulating those?
Yeah, the Housing Services Act regulates that anyone who is experiencing gender-based violence has an absolute priority on the internal transfer list. The other service manager requirement is for individuals who are overhoused, so their household occupies a unit with more bedrooms than they need. And subsequent to the Ombudsman's report and City Council endorsement, there's a middle one for Toronto Community Housing Corporation, which is the crisis priority transfer.
Priority transfer.
Correct.
So perhaps we should clarify some of those things just as a board as well.
Yeah, and I think part of the work
Then we have our internal one at that point.
Yeah, what we're engaged with the TCHC staff team here is the second component of this work is looking at the transfers. Obviously, there's an interrelationship with the Housing Services Act and our recommendations, and we'll be engaging fully with the TCH team to provide our input into that process.
So there's a regulated piece, which is the Housing Services Act. There's a city council piece, which is a crisis.
Correct.
And then there's our internal policy.
That's
so
correct.
They all have to fit together in that order. Yep. I'm not sure everybody understands that. Thank you very much for that, Mr.
You're welcome.
Rollins.
Alex. Vanita?
Through the chair, just very quickly for Darren, the legal team, was this policy, when drafted, reviewed by any external or third-party counsel, or is it strictly internal? I do understand we have human rights experience internal to our legal services team at TCHC.
Yeah, I mean, we drafted the policy using the internal resources that we have. We haven't engaged external counsel to review it. I will say that the policy at a fairly high level simply evidences that we will comply with our obligations under the Human Rights Code. We'll recognize the protected grounds that are addressed in the code and describe some of the measures that we will take in order to address those tenant entitlements based on those code grounds. I mean, there will be detail that will be added through the process over time. You've heard that we've had some suggestions from the Ombudsman that we will continue to review and engage the Ombudsman in discussion around as we move forward with this. But we have, I mean, I will say as well that we've considered the policies like the city's policy on human rights complaints in drafting this document. So it's not something that we've invented just from the ground up without looking at what the approach that other organizations have taken to this kind of matter.
Okay. So there are no other comments on this? I would suggest we're just approving the human rights policy. The companion policies are being reviewed. What has been attached is what is currently in place. I think we have the commitment of Sean and Dara that they are going to consider the Ombudsman's comments on the policy and incorporate those. If it needs to come back, okay. So I would like to move forward with this because it will hold up us implementing the other recommendations that the Ombudsman has. And I think it was clear from the deputants that we need to move forward with this. So do I have anybody who will move the approval of the human rights policy? John, thank you very much. Seconder, Nick. All in favor? Thank you. And so we have your undertaking that you will consider this. So thank you very much. And thank you very much for your attendance. We appreciate it. So there was a little mix-up with my script, and so I held item number 10 because I thought it needed to be held. It doesn't need to be held, so there were no questions on it. So can I have a quick motion to approve the 2024-2025 corporate insurance renewal? Naram, thank you. Vanita, seconder, all in favor? Thank you. Perfect. So we will move on to item number 11A, which is the Swansea Mews Initial Development Proposal, and we have a deputant, Mr. Mark Richardson.
Members of the board, thank you for having me here today. My name is Mark Richardson. I'm a volunteer technical lead with an organization called HousingNowTO.com. Our HousingNowTO.com civic tech volunteers and affordable housing volunteers from across Toronto have actively watched Toronto Community Housing's challenges on your Swansea Muse site. The lands are near High Park since the structural failure of the old 1970s stacks townhomes in May of 2020 and the required evacuation of those failing 50-year-old low-rise buildings which contained 154 social housing units. Since those social housing townhouse blocks at Swansea Muse were condemned in 2022, our volunteers have closely watched the progress on other TCHC redevelopment sites like the Don Somerville site, and also like Regent Park phases 4 and 5, in order to determine the size and scale of the new development that will be required to make future reconstruction of Swansea Muse financially viable in the coming years. Our volunteers have read your staff report from the Acting Chief Development Officer, and we fully agree that the rebuild of Swansea Muse presents an opportunity to re-envision and build back a stronger, more economically diverse community that attempts to respond to the city's urgent need for more rental housing of all kinds while replacing those 154 social housing rent geared to income units that were on the original site. However, based on our experience from dozens of other affordable housing development sites to the City of Toronto under the Housing Now, the Modern TO, and the Rapid Housing Program, we would like to raise the following concerns about the current initial development proposal that is in front of you today for this large 5.3 acre property at Swansea Muse. The highest total unit estimate in the IDP for Swansea Muse, 854 units, 154 social housing replacement units, is unlikely to meet the bare minimum of what you will need to make this project financially viable given the current down market for development lands in the GTHA in 2024. Our Housing Now volunteers would advise TCH to create an enhanced alternative design proposal for Swansea Muse with a much higher density target of approximately 1,200 units, including those 154 social housing units. While the current IDP for Swansea Muse was developed in consultation with interdivisional city working groups, our Housing Now TO experience over the last few years has been that the initial development proposals created by similar working groups always fall short, and you need to have much greater density in order to be viable. We can show some examples of that from Housing Now sites. The original Housing Now site at Merton was originally proposed at 15 stories and 150 units. Now we're at 29 stories and 294 units. Victoria Park in Councillor Candaval's ward was 450 apartments. Now it's at 705 apartments in order to make the math work. The math is very hard. And in fact, even your own TCHC headquarters site that we've worked on, it started out at 21 stories and 223 bedrooms. It ended up needing to be 32 stories and 346 bedrooms. So we see a lot of language in the staff report that talks about how the redevelopment needs to work in proximity to the low-rise neighborhoods and how massing considerations of these blocks should consider the nature of surrounding context. This is essentially default old Yellow Belt City of Toronto planning language, and it is essentially telling you to minimize your Toronto community housing impact and defer to the backyards of millionaire homeowners on Cohill Drive and Ellis Gardens. Our volunteers would encourage you to take a much bolder stance on what you need to do at Swansea Muse. Focus instead on maximizing your opportunities to deliver net new social housing and workforce rental housing on these city-owned lands. We've included in our report a link to a project we did with graduate students at the Toronto Metropolitan University recently on a city-owned parcel on the Christie lands. It's not a like-for-like match by any means, but I think it will give you some good direction. And we hope that we can engage with you to help make sure that what gets built at Swansea Mews is at a size and a scale that ensures a successful delivery within the next 5 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any, John?
So the Christie site's not even close to resembling this, because there are no homes in the area other than what are south of the Christie site. So the comparable is of no relevance.
I would say that we need to treat all of these sites as tabula rasa, and proximity to homes is not a priority anymore in the city of Toronto.
So what it sounds like the initial development proposal is doing is giving consideration to the neighborhoods to the north. You refer to them as $1 million homes. Show me a home in this city that's not $1 million home. It's not like they're millionaires because they've moved into Swansea, or they've lived in Swansea for 30 or 40 years. So it sounds like you're proposing that TCHC erect a number of 30-story buildings that'll block out sunshine and block out views. Is that?
I'm essentially asking you to question what our city's priorities are. The priorities when you were councillor were to protect the Yellow Belt. You are no longer a city councillor.
It's not to protect the Yellow Belt. That's not the city's priority. That's not the priority of City Council. The City Council priority has clearly been stated is to build more housing, but not at all costs.
This is a minimal cost. There's already apartment neighborhood across the street. All we are asking you to do is use your Swansea Mews lands like they are an apartment neighborhood. And frankly, if people do own houses that are worth millions of dollars, on paper, they are millionaires, sir. And we have to create priorities in this city, and protecting people's backyards can no longer be our priority given our current housing crisis.
So one thing that the city has tried to do with things such as the mid-rise guidelines is to make sure that there aren't wind tunnels and that there is sunshine that is able to come onto other housing. And so what you're proposing is not giving any consideration to those thoughts. Yes, we need more housing. Of course, we need more housing, but not, in my view, not to stick up a bunch of 30-story buildings that are going to create enormous density in that particular area, and block out views and sunshine for people that live in the neighborhood.
Your challenge is purely economics. When you were building something like Don Somerville, you could get away with a ratio of 4-to-1, 5-to-1 of the social housing unit to the market units. You're using the market units to offset those costs. You now need 7 units, 8 units of market to offset the 154 social housing units you're creating. This is not about right or wrong. It's not about personal preference. This is about math. And
I don't have any further comments.
you have to work the math. You have to lead these projects based on speed and viability of your products that you are producing. All I can tell you is that's what the math is. And the math is only going to get worse if the federal government changes. So you're going to have to be willing to upset the neighbors.
Parthy.
Through you, Madam Chair. Mark, you referenced a site in my ward, Victoria Park, the Housing Now site. Can you share those numbers, the number of units and the rough acreage?
I want to say it's about 2 acres, 1.6, 1.8 acres, somewhere around there. And it started out as a relatively tall building, 22 and 11.
Exactly.
And there's no social housing in there. We're not trying to create RGI units. We're just trying to create below market units.
Yeah.
Now it's 705 across the street from bungalows on the other side of Vic Park.
Exactly, because there's a lot of talk and language about housing in this committee, in this room, and in this institution. Numbers tell a better story. So we're seeing a 705 at approximately 1.8 acres. with this site, we're seeing how many in 5.3?
At the moment, staff have it at between 700 and 850 total units. So, somewhere around about 200 units an acre, just a little bit below that. 150.
That ratio of unit to acreage strikes me as low, given other city projects, right?
Oh, it's slightly different because this site is only serviced on a streetcar. It's not serviced by subway, which is the case in some, but it's
But it's
closer
in a
to,
neighborhood that's very.
it's probably closer to Merton.
It's
right?
well-served, right? Would you say, would you characterize that community as well-served with
100%.
rich amenities?
Yeah, it's a well-served, neighborhood. And part of the way that you're changing these models now is Swansea Mews was less than 60 years old, and it had reached an issue with state of good repair. You're trying to make these buildings stay in state of good repair for 99 years. The only way you make that work is if you have
No, I
enough
understand.
revenue to make that work.
Next and last question, would you characterize the conversation around the Housing Now projects at Vic Park as, was it framed as a priority by PHC?
Well, it wasn't a TCHC project at Vic Park. Right?
No, by PHC, was it?
But Planning and Housing Committee, yeah, I mean.
Was considered a priority, right?
Adjustment and asked for 11 extra floors and 200 extra apartments. Through committee of adjustment
Mark,
as a minor variance.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's the point.
I guess first off, thank you, appreciate sort of the analysis and insight that you're providing. I think big picture, I think there's a couple big premises that we fundamentally agree with. We should be maximizing the housing we can put on our sites on redevelopment projects. Secondly, from a financial perspective, the more market units we can bring to bear to support more RGI and affordable units is also a positive. So the financial equation is an important part of this. As we say here, from my perspective, I think staff has been doing that and also recognizing this is also the initial development proposal. And so there's still a long road to go, unfortunately, because of the zoning process. But at least from my perspective, these are priorities, increasing the density and trying to make the financial model work, because fundamentally these are very expensive projects to replace units and hopefully add units.
We can amend the motion and add those words at the end, because as Nick says, it is very early in the process, but we could add to it that we would maximize the delivery of new housing. To the motion number 1, I don't know if somebody can put up motion number. And I don't, sorry, I couldn't hear that. Yes, whatever the words are, but we can add that at the end. Well, I'm hoping somebody can do that because I can't. But I think that that's the general sentiment. And so it will be there, and we will go through the process.
And our students and volunteers are happy to provide whatever advice and input you're interested in to maximize the opportunities on this site.
Thank you. Okay, we seem to be having technical difficulties. Sonia, can you not put up the, oh, is this because you're, oh, you're.
Unplug and maybe that'll help.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I forgot that you had put up the first proposal. So, okay, how about this? With the aim, boy, you did that fast. With the aim to maximize the delivery of new housing units at the end of the, well, do we want to
Affordable
limit
housing
it
units.
at this
Yeah,
point?
it's not just new housing, it's new affordable housing.
Well, we're talking about market and the finances and, right? So.
We know that, but our job isn't to do that. We're now into the pro forma territory.
Okay. So are we comfortable with this amendment?
I'm sorry. Our job is to redevelop the site.
Yes.
Our job is to maximize, replace our RGI and maximize other affordable housing on the site. However that gets done, that is now going to be up to a process with the developer, with the city, with TCHC. So maximizing the housing would be necessary in order to achieve more affordable housing. And I want to be really clear that the Auditor General said Toronto Community Housing, you have all these sites and you've replaced your RGI and you've not built anything new. And that was a seminal report. Our job is to try to make sure at every site we're including not just our replacement, but more affordable. So to do that, we'll have to maximize housing. But I don't want us to look like we're not having affordable housing, because all types of housing on the site, if you want to put that. But I don't think that Mr. Richardson's here to talk about non-affordable housing, because that's his whole. So I don't think we're asking questions anymore, but I'd like to be really clear. To achieve whatever, maximize delivery of new housing units, to achieve the best housing mix on the site, if you'd like to put that, but it's not just to put more market housing.
Okay, so can we put,
Isn't it the question of the definition of affordable, Paula, which is just 80% of market?
I'm just going to say that because at the Housing Secretary, we have the ability to determine when this goes through. Is it 40%? Is it 60%? Is it 80%? We're not making that decision.
No,
we're just
we're
saying
not.
we want not more than RGI units on the site. And I think that's important that TCHC is clear. That's our goal. And however we get there, fine.
I agree, Paula. I think we need to insert the term affordable.
So I think what I'm hearing is that we have two interests. One is to maximize housing on the site, and one is to maximize the component of affordable housing that is included within that housing. So both at the same time.
The way we maximize the affordable housing is by having more market housing. That's up to the pro forma, that's up to everybody. Our goal is to replace our RGI and include affordable housing, and that's what's happened in every other site. So I think that I want to be really clear
so
for
what
TCHC
do you,
to be clear.
so we've got an amendment here so that we're clear that we're maximizing the delivery. How do you want to change that?
New affordable units. And then that means it has to be maximized. If we're asking for new affordable, there's only one way to get it, and that's maximizing your market. There's no other way.
Yes, Sean.
Through the chair, I agree that TCHC's interest should be maximizing the affordable homes that we can put onto the site. I think we should also talk about the optimal unit mix, because it's important that we accomplish both, right?
That's fine. Maximize affordable housing through an optimal mix of housing on this site. That's fine. That'd be great. So we're clearly saying we're not stuck. We're asking people to be very creative, because we don't have a lot of sites. I forget how many acres this is. 2 something? Five. So 5's a pretty big site. So we need to maximize the mix, but maximize. Don Somerville, we went from 120 RGI units when I took that site over from the former councillor to 100 rental, 100 affordable rental, 125 rental, and 300. It changed dramatically, but that was all through this conversation. So let's be clear on what our goals are from a board perspective.
So are you comfortable with the amendment that Dara has made? It's up here.
So I just want to be
Yes,
sure.
I think that's fine.
I just want to be sure, the concern that I've got is the one approach to that would be to look at the pro forma itself and look at how we might, within the existing maximum number of units, maximize the number of affordable housing. I think units, and I think the intention is to not only maximize the number of affordable housing units, but actually maximize the number of available units of all types on the site.
That's what it says. Optimal mix of housing.
Okay.
New RGI in there, who knows? So I think that covers everything.
Let's try and avoid getting too prescriptive,
Yeah.
this is more sort of
You know,
intention.
we don't even have a developer, so we just have our big goal.
Early stages. We just wanted to highlight our intent. That's all we want to do. Jessica?
I just wanted to speak to this amendment in a little more detail. The intention of this IDP process is really to begin the process of design for this site. It is to commission our consulting team to prepare our background documents and to proceed with our rezoning. We are very clear in this document that these aren't minimums or maximum densities that are set here. These are just preliminary high-level numbers that could be higher or lower depending on the outcomes of that comprehensive study. In terms of the unit mixes, I think it's always the intention of our work to add net new affordable where, as a key component of looking at a balanced pro forma, and that's something that will be part of that comprehensive planning process as we're moving forward as well.
Perfect.
So we're just giving a parameter.
Yes.
That's all we're doing here.
Just outlining our intention.
A parameter,
It's
what we'd
just-
like to have. And that's it.
Yeah. So can I have a motion to approve? Vanita, seconder Nick, all in favor? Richardson, thank you very much for your time. Thank you. We appreciate it. So now we will move to item 11B, which is the review of the Q2 financial results. I don't know, I know this has been through BIFAC, so I pulled this, so I don't know if any other board members have any questions on this? No, so I'm just gonna, Lily, I'm just gonna ask. Oh, Brian's got his hand up, I'm sorry. Brian, you go first.
Well, my question was to staff with regard to the former site, but I can ask it offline later. It was with regards to the history of that site and the challenges around that. But I'll
back
do
at
it
Swansea?
offline.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Maybe you can speak to Jessica offline. I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand, Brian.
It's okay.
Sorry. Questions. I was concerned about the market rent is below budget, and I was wondering if you could speak to that. I don't know if it's a hangover from COVID or...
Mary, for the question. It is a bit of a hand from COVID, and also there's a process of the annual rent review. If an RGI tenant did not submit the required paperwork by the due date, their rent was automatically bumped into the market rent category. So when the tenants did submit the notice of assessment and complete the review, the market rent got flipped back. So we call it's a loss of eligibility, some adjustments and credits and embed in that number. So it's kind of sort of in the previous reporting period, it was the market rent was, I call it artificially inflated.
Okay, so when you budgeted, you thought, okay, and that's the prime driver?
That's the prime driver of that.
Market rent is low. Okay, thank you very much. I do, and I've mentioned this before in the reallocation report, I do have concerns about the fact that the demand maintenance is $53 million. It's a significant percentage of reduction from last year, and I am concerned about in the future impact, what's being deferred. So I have asked for a report on the root causes. So Lily, I'd like you to.
It's on our action.
Oh, is it? It's on the action item? Okay.
Yeah, we'll follow through and report back to the board.
Okay.
With our
And
findings and recommendations.
And again, my concern is about the advanced spending, given that, and we're increasing the advanced spending, not decreasing it, and our funding is coming to an end in 2027.
Thanks for that question. It's an agenda on our to-do list as well. So the spend rate for the past few years has been over 100%. Given the fact that the funding is gonna sunset in 2027, the team are also actively working towards rejigging some of the projects and also project schedule to ensure we stay within the program and also funders' requirement.
And my understanding from Alan's report on the reallocations is that you will keep your eye on the move-outs so that you don't have to use 2025 dollars, that if there's other dollars from other lines that haven't been used, that you will use those first before making advanced spending.
Absolutely correct. Like advanced spend is the last area that we would go to, and it is used throughout the year sometimes, as a cushion that you need in order to have budget available to continue with things. noting that at the end of the year, then there will be a true-up based on all of the budgets that are for each line item.
Okay, because it's like 33 million now, and we should be going the other way. It should be reducing each year for the next few years rather than increasing. So I appreciate your commitment to that. Okay, those are my questions, as long as those things are on the action list. Perfect. Thank you, Lily. Can I have a motion to approve the Q2 financial results? Vanita, thank you. Parthy, second. All in favor? Thank you very much. We will move on to item number 11C, which is past tenant arrears. And we have pardon? Oh, I thought I heard, sorry, I thought I heard noise. We have Catherine Wilkinson, who's going to depute on this.
Yes, thank you again. First, I'd actually like to acknowledge the number of deputants that came to today's meeting. It really makes me hopeful. The tenants are getting more engaged and getting more informed and educated, both by attending the board, deputing at the board, and for those who may be watching online. And it's important for us to feel welcome at this table, that we have this opportunity to provide feedback, and that every deputant should be given an opportunity to be asked questions by the board before the next speaker gets up to speak. So I wanted to talk about the past tenant arrears. I know it seems rather odd that a tenant would want to talk about that. But I do want to acknowledge there's been an incredible amount of work and collaboration gone into revising our arrears collections process. And clearly the efforts of OACH with their early resolution officers, working with Toronto Housing, with their tenant service coordinators, you know, they have tweaked their internal homes program to improve the timelines and eliminate manual tasks. So in a report that went to Tenant Services Committee in June 2024, Toronto Housing successfully collected 98.6% of rent and parking charges. So this is a clear indicator that we are on track with our existing tenants. For the staff who work on tenancy management files, who we may never see at this table, they should be commended for staying the course, adapting their approach to comply with an ever-changing arrears collections process, and they are directly responsible for helping to keep our tenants housed and delivering results we can all be proud of. Although the September TSC meeting was rescheduled, the operations report indicated that the arrears are hovering around the $30 million mark. And I'm pleased to see that BIFAC is recommending a write-off of $10 million in arrears from tenants who moved out prior to 2017. This is an important step to addressing legacy arrears of former tenants. It makes sense to use our resources to focus on our existing tenants to keep them housed, rather than chasing former tenants. It can't be said enough, the importance to identifying early when tenants are struggling to pay their rent, to discuss repayment options, including outreach to external agencies that may be able to help tenants get back on track before the arrears get too high. So I support the proposed report before you today. When we work together and with our tenants, all things are possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions or comments as it relates to the past tenant arrears? Okay, hearing none, can I have a motion to approve? Anita, thank you. Can I have a seconder? Debbie, thank you. All in favor? Motion passed. We will move on to item number 12D. Oh, and that was Parthy's, and also 12E. Do we know where he? Okay, so can we all come back to that when he gets back? And so then we will move on to item number 13. And we have, 13A was mine. Okay. Does anybody, well, sorry, there's so many deputants. I got paper all over the place. Are there any, before I ask my questions, oh, here's Parthy. Parthy?
Waiting for you.
We're waiting for you because we're at, 12D and E, and then I'll come back. So the first one is City Council directions requiring board attention.
Just through you, Madam Chair, to staff, I wanted to better understand if there's any intersection with this direction and our own feedback in camera about cybersecurity.
So through the chair, I'd say, yes, there certainly is. There's, an audit is one thing to tell you how things stand at a point in time, but our collaborative relationship with the CISO and their ability to assess various organizations, including TCHC, against a very well-established set of international standards, and to do that in an ongoing fashion so that you're not being audited once every couple of years or 3 or 4 years, but you're actually tracking your ability to meet those standards in an ongoing way. So they're different tools, but both intended to achieve a strong cybersecurity resilience and profile.
And, I can imagine economies of scale may benefit agencies, corporations, boards like ourselves by having that work done by the city. Is that part of the work plan or the intention behind this direction?
Through the chair, that's certainly true. Economies of scale and access to the additional resources the city has are valuable. And I would also say the standardization and the approach using a common set of standards, because that's not always the case. There's a variety of ways to approach this challenge, and having the city establish for us, these are the set of standards that we'd like you to achieve, makes it simpler for us to focus on the most operative changes.
Mm-hmm. When do we expect an update on this recommendation?
Through the chair, my understanding is that the work with the CISO is an ongoing go-forward recommendation. I don't know that there's a report back per se, but I'd be happy to commit to reporting back to, we've already
verbal
committed.
Update?
Happy to do that.
Okay, thank you, that's it.
No other questions on this matter? Okay, could I have a motion to receive? Vanita, Parthy, seconder, all in favor? Thank you. And we'll move to your other item, 12E, progress update on the developing a strategic plan.
I think for the benefit of the public, if a brief update can be shared on the development.
Mm-hmm. Ada?
Thank you, through the chair. Throughout the summer, we've conducted and completed a number of engagement sessions with tenants, with our city stakeholders, with the board, our leadership team internally, and have gathered all of the feedback related to the strategic plan. What we have in the report is a summary of the high-level themes that we've heard. And to take everyone through, we've heard the themes around preserving and expanding affordable housing, and TCHC's need to focus on maintaining our existing housing stock while seeking new opportunities to expand affordable housing opportunities across the city. We've heard really loud and clear around enhancing tenant service. So there is a strong desire for improved customer service, focusing on safety, on communications, on response times, and ensuring that tenants' needs are met in a timely and effective way. We've also heard that building stronger communities is critical, and fostering community connections and resilience through social support programs and partnerships, specifically for vulnerable groups such as seniors, youth, and individuals with disabilities, is important work for us in the future. We also are looking at understanding our tenants' unique needs. So here we have consulted with different tenants around accessibility, anti-Black racism, and other equitable access to services for tenant groups. Finally, we look internally at organizational excellence and our own capacity to deliver in terms of data, digital technology, and improving service delivery. Our next steps for the plan are to move into a final review, as well as an approval for the plan in December. Looking into Q1 of 2025, we will be establishing measurements and KPIs and reporting related to the strategic plan. Thank you.
Thank you. When I was on the school board, I was a member of the committee that established the multi-year strategic plan, and the feedback we received after many years of its implementation was that, in short, it's all things to everyone. So how do we ensure there's focus? How can we have confidence that there'll be focus in the plan that comes back in December for approval?
So through the chair, I'll just say I've been involved in strategic planning in a lot of different public organizations as well, and that's an inherent challenge, right? You do want to speak to all of the necessities and all of the areas that the organization is responsible for, and that's necessary to do. But you also want to give clarity to show where our priorities lie and where we're going to allocate our resources in the coming years. So we're fully aware that that is the intention of this approach. But what you just heard in terms of the summary of what we hear from the engagement we do is not that, right? It's quite far-reaching and it touches on all things. So where I think you'll begin to see that is where we lay out the specific initiatives and the specific allocation of resources and how we're going to measure progress against those. So that work is still to come, but that I hope will allow the board to have better clarity on if we apply these resources in this way, then we're going to get that specific outcome from it. And you'll naturally see that they come in a priority list. We're going to focus on certain things before others.
That's good to hear. So for clarity, there'll be a prioritized list or approach brought to the document. Thank you. I appreciate this, and I think this is part of building good public confidence in us. Thank you.
Vanita?
Just through the chair to add to what Director Perthy has stated, and Sean, it's equally imperative to us as a board of directors that the strategic plan informs how we will be applying good governance towards those key initiatives that are stepped up and brought forward.
Yes, our oversight is very important. And it will be coming back to the board for approval, so obviously there's a lot of time for input. And I did, in my opening remarks, thank everyone for the input, because we've had all stakeholder groups involved in this process to date, and so we certainly appreciate their insight into how TCHC moves forward, particularly the tenants. So are there any other comments on item 12E?
I just want to be clear on
Paula?
the pathway.
Pardon?
So I want to be clear on the pathway here.
Okay.
That this is the strategic plan for TCHC and the role of the board in that strategic plan. Setting it, developing it, approving it.
Through the chair, that's correct?
No, I'm asking.
Oh, yes.
The balance here. Was it the board's plan? Is it the corporation's plan? What's the relationship? I'd like to be very clear on that.
Through the chair, the strategic plan will be coming back in December, and we'll lay out the goals as identified through the engagement process and prioritization work that we've been doing up to now. When I talk about further work around things like initiatives, resource allocation, and metrics, that's going to require more work from management on what I would more accurately call business planning or annualized planning, right? So that work will still come forward. The high-level guidance document, which is multi-year in nature, is very much owned and driven by the board, and that's helpful for us. I'd say the individual annualized business planning is more driven up by management to say, here's how we achieve the things that you've set out for us as specific goals.
So there's a section as to what this board thinks it needs in order to have the proper oversight and accountability in the strategic plan and the operations. And I'm not sure that we have that. It's in there somewhere, but.
Well, there certainly will be reporting, but it has not been developed yet. I'm looking to Ada because
So in the planning process, we are starting with the draft approval in, the approval of the plan in December. Into Q1 of 2025, there is an opportunity to weigh in on measures of success, KPIs, and how we will show that we're demonstrating progress. And in that, we will need to have management input on the work plan, on the actions that we're taking against priorities. So those need to be defined prior to being able to determine those final measurements in the reporting.
I guess I may not be being too clear, but you're going to demonstrate through KPIs. But really and truly, what is it that we need? What type of reporting do we need? What are the standards of practice that we need to have in order to be clear on our fiduciary responsibilities, on our oversights as a board? That is something I'm looking for, and that's actually for the board to advise, including reporting, these kinds of reports, everything. So that's what's the standard that we're going to look for.
And so the board will be engaged in that, but it's still to come.
Okay. I just don't want that to be, because you're doing it, everything will be about you, and that's okay, because you're doing it. But the board's here, we have to have something that's about us. So when we go into private and we look at certain things and how did that happen? How did this happen? Why is this like this? I think it's also time to strengthen some of that. And I think everybody would agree with that.
Yes.
So I want to make sure we need to look after our own business here.
Yes.
Which is a little different than the overall business.
Yes, and how it's reported to us will
Thank
be
you.
up to us to decide and what we need to see. And we've already made comments, you weren't at the retreat, but we did talk about the reporting that we used to get before, which was not helpful, in my opinion, for the last strategic plan. So we're definitely need to improve on that. So if there are no other comments on this, can I have a motion to receive the report? Excuse me, Benita. Nick, seconder, all in favor. Oh, Brian, you got your hand up. Sorry. Sorry.
My question is, I mean, it's our strategic plan eventually to be approved, but I'm concerned about the relationship between the strategic plan and having it affirmed in some way by our shareholder, because we need to be consistent and know that our shareholder is 100% behind the strategic plan. And what is the process to have that to be unified with our shareholder?
Yes, and certainly we've engaged with the city because we did commit to the city that our strategic plan would be aligned with theirs.
It's more than the city staff, it's city council.
Okay.
I mean, it's one thing to have the city manager, and we've been working very closely with them, but ultimately it's the city councilors who are our shareholders as a group, not staff. And I just want to make sure that we're aligned. Both, we don't want later, because the city has a lot of priorities around housing, and I want to make sure that we're aligned with what they think we should do, and that we don't get farther down the line and find out city council would like us to move a little one way or the other.
Okay. Ada, I don't know if Paula wanted to have something to say, but Ada, do you want to speak to that?
Yes, through the chair, I think in the depth of our consultation with our city stakeholders, we've considered multiple sets of interests, and they are in our final review process in the next several months. We will be having conversations to make sure that final draft aligns with those interests. Whether or not they're going to align for multiple years with council interests and those things that might arise, I think we have the relationships in place to address those as they come, but they have certainly been engaged in this process leading into this draft.
Okay.
City council does not approve the strategic plan. I want to be really clear on that.
Yeah.
And there's a housing plan that would be informed here. If there's, you know when we're out of alignment, when you get a shareholder direction at this board. Now you know. Keep the tenant action, tenant advisory committee, make it permanent. That was a shareholder, direction to the shareholder. So I'm assuming those things will have guided you to get to the next level of this plan. But it's not for us to say yes or no and tinker with the plan. It belongs to
Yeah, it doesn't come to council.
Paula, my concern more is in terms of the amount of housing we need in the city and the role of TCHC in providing some or a lot of that, and just be that we have clarity on our role.
You'll get clarity with shareholder direction. Let's be clear. If there's a change in something or around development or something's changing, that will go through council. But this isn't up to councillors to start with. So I think there's a dynamic there that's good in place that should suffice, Brian, for this round of this. I would not want to see us making changes to the strategic plan on the council floor. I think that would be a serious problem. If you've ever been there, I happen to.
And I think in our draft, it does talk about working with the city as far as, so I think we've covered this off. Are there any other questions or comments? So can I think I started the motion. I hadn't seen Brian's hand.
Can I just say one more thing? It might be important, based on what you've said, Brian, to look at some of those strategic directions that the city has set clearly, like the AG when she set that. That we're referencing some of those things from the last strategic plan time into the next one. So there's the human rights, we're responding to different things from the accountability officers, from city direction about tenants, not to rewrite it, but to be clear that that was part of the role, responding to what TCHC is doing. And that might be helpful, Brian, if we looked at that with that lens.
And certainly in the in-camera session, we're going to go through the next draft of the strat
I just want to be clear we have that lens there because it's not, there's often
we can raise that.
Requests and directions coming.
Okay. So I'm hoping the third time is a charm. Can I move to receive this? Vanita, Paula second, all in favor? Perfect, thank you. And we'll move on to 13 and 13A. I just had a couple of questions. So you've got these repayment agreements that you enter into. Some of them are very long, like 160 months or something. You do talk about breaches. I'm interested to know the percentage of these agreements that you enter into in general. What's the percentage that is breached, are breached?
Thank you. So through the chair, right now we rely on TCHC to monitor the breaches, and then they refer the case back to the OACH, and we determine if there's exceptional circumstances warranting a second repayment agreement. And the average is around 30% that breach.
So in general, it's 30%. So Nadia, that's?
So in general, we see breach rates between 30 and 50%. It depends on the community circumstances, but 30% is not inaccurate in terms of our OACH agreements.
Okay. And I'm not clear on this rent bank. I don't know who's funding the rent bank, and are tenants just trading an obligation to us to the obligation to the rent bank? It's not clear to me how the rent bank works.
Thank you. So through the chair, the rent bank. Is it on now? Oh, sorry about that. Through the chair, so TCHC, TSHC, and OACH were approached by the City of Toronto. So they're actually the ones funding the program. And it used to be reserved for just market rent tenants, and it was a loan. During COVID, it changed to a grant, and it currently is a grant. So it's not that tenants have to pay it back. It's meant to support tenants in the groups of tenants who are employed on pensions, groups that have historically not had access to funding to pay back arrears as a grant.
Okay, so there is no obligation, it's continuing to be a grant, because it wasn't clear. There were a lot of things that were grants or, you know, during COVID, there were exceptional circumstances, but that's continuing and that's indefinite, that they're entitled to, because you save $5,000 every 12 months?
So yes, as the program, it's a pilot right now because they're looking, so historically it was always market rent tenants, now it's RGI tenants. And why it's housed with OACH is the stipulation to get into the program is to be able to show that you have a sustainable tenancy going forward and that supports are in place to maintain the tenancy. So we pay off the arrears, set up a reasonable repayment agreement with PayDirect, so long-term their housing is stabilized.
Okay, so that's going to have a huge impact to us if that's the case. Have we, pardon? No, it's this, my understanding is it's the city's rent bank. Yeah. So. You have to apply. Yeah, but if RGI tenants are entitled to apply and they can demonstrate that they, going forward, can maintain their tenancy, it will have a huge impact on our arrears.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, so through the chair, we're already seeing the impact, and I think you'll actually see more of an impact in our next report because we just started in June, but it's actually eliminating the need for repayment agreements or what were potentially very long repayment agreements, shortening them substantially.
Because certainly we have a number that are over 20,000 and 10,000. Okay, so can you include that in your reports that we understand how much is being collected from the rent bank?
Thank you. Yes, we will for sure.
Okay. Perfect. Are there any other? Yeah, John?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question for the COO, and that it's in regard to the stat on the table on page 7 of the report, where we're only reaching 56% of the tenants who have not paid in the first month. So 44% of tenants who have not paid are not being reached in the first month. Can you just tell the board what we're doing to try to improve that figure? And maybe why it's so low?
Thank you for the question. A couple of things I'd like to speak to. So we do have portfolios where there's staff vacancies, and so we don't often have the ability to catch up within the time period when we're covering portfolios for short-term disability, et cetera. For example, right now we have 6 portfolios vacant in the East region alone, and so we're working to mitigate and support those. That's a factor. The other factor is sometimes it's difficult to get a hold of the tenant, and so we're trying a variety of means, unsuccessful means, maybe having conversations with other members of the household, and so there's that. We have found that there's some staff that continue to need support and oversight and training, and so we're continuing to do that work as well. The other factor here is you are only seeing tenancies that actually translate into significant arrears. So all of the successful contacts that we do make during that period with tenants in arrears don't actually get reflected through the OACH numbers. Okay. So you can appreciate they're not contacting no one, or the percentage you mentioned. There will be quite a few successful contacts that don't ever arise to a board report. So I wanted to flag that as well.
So in the case of the 6 vacancies, those are tenant service coordinators that are absent?
So through the chair, yes. We are working with our human resources, people and culture department to fill long-term vacancies and formal vacancies where our staff leaves. We're having some struggles with short-term vacancies. The hub model did separate historically clustered TSCs in operating unit offices. So when we have a vacancy in a hub, you're looking at potentially bringing in a TSC who also has a hub. And so we're still struggling with that, but we're working with HR to look at opportunities to AR up other roles and really try to make sure that that gap is covered.
And so if there's a building in which there's no tenant service coordinator covering it, what's the backup plan if people aren't paying?
Through the chair, that would be addressed through, as Nadia mentioned, TSC's covering off that portfolio. We also have support from the supervisor who oversees. They would provide whatever support in their supervisory role that they could. And so it's just about figuring out priorities within that workload of, they may not do all of the things, but they really target in on arrears, for example, or really urgent things that need to be addressed while that.
And this is now, if somebody hasn't paid, that's coming up in the home system, I guess, is it? It's becoming, it's flagged there?
Yes, we're able to actually monitor, and now that OACH is officially using homes, we're able to share information more quickly. So we continue to do that.
That's it, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Uba? Oh, sorry. Uba's had a hand up for quite a while.
No, it's okay, no worries. Thank you. And I just was curious about where this 5,000 coming from. Is it from Epic? And who can refer a tenant in terms of to get that 5,000? Are they getting referral from shelters? Are they getting referrals from different agencies?
Thank you. So through the chair, my understanding it's through the City of Toronto, through their grants program is where they have this funding that's available. And right now, like I said, it's a pilot. So they're just piloting it with OACH and TCHC for tenants who are on RGI. So if a tenant gets into arrears, they would go through TCHC's process. And if they're referred to OACH, we would determine their eligibility for the program, and we would put the application forward for them.
Uba, that answers your question?
Somewhat, I'm still confused, to be honest with you, because I know Epic usually, I heard tenants who are not residing at TCHC or who are not getting RGI is getting that support through Epic, which is run by the city, of course. And it was the referral was coming from the shelters. So I'm not sure 100% if I understand this process. Is this the same thing? Like this, where this money is coming from? And who can refer that so I'm not sure if I get the complete answer, but
yeah, so through the chair.
Or if I understand, maybe you answer, but I don't understand fully well.
Yeah, no, so through the chair, so Epic, my understanding is with Epic, is that their funding is, they're supporting tenants who do not live in TCHC. So they're kind of providing OACH services for tenants who live in other social housing providers, not TCHC. So we've also tried to access funds for tenants on cases, and it's not available to our tenants. So the Rent Bank approached us with this funding. If you want, in the next report, I can provide a more detailed explanation about the program, if that might be helpful. And how tenants can access it. But right now, through the pilot, it's just access through OACH directly to their portal, and they're working with Neighborhood Information Post on rolling out the program.
Okay, thank you.
Paula?
I just want to clarify that. Tenants who aren't in TCHC and their market units have a pathway for rent assistance through the Rent Bank through Epic. What's opened up is tenants who are in RGI units, maybe it's not just TCHC, but RGI units in TCHC have an ability to get a grant for their arrears, but it's only through the OACH. Not anybody can just walk in and apply for the grant. It's got to be recommended as part of the case, correct?
Oh, yes, that's correct.
Yeah, so that's entirely clear to me now. So the percent, I just want to know the percent, when we're looking at people in arrears, a lot of people go in arrears for a month. It's pretty typical. You miss the payment, and then you come in, you make the payment, and then you're catching up. So would you look at that as, it's not a delinquent, it's just sometimes miss the payment, miss this, miss that, compared to somebody that's now going into 2 months arrears? Where would you put the marker as to once we're really seriously saying, okay, now it looks like we've got a problem tenancy?
So through the chair, we do have a arrears collection process that actually stipulates timelines associated with issuing the N4s and communication. The compliance-related documents that you see in front of you from OACH typically reflects our inability to meet those timelines. However, the tenancies that come through OACH are tenants that are actually in true arrears. So there are tenants who are in late payer status that wouldn't necessarily be reflected here. We also have cases where we're continuing to engage with the household before we issue a letter. So it isn't often the case where, it is often the case where we're actually engaging with the household in the tenancy, and it isn't necessarily reflected in the paperwork because we're seeing the person and we're having conversations. But I would say that for the most part, the OACH escalations are tenants that are in true arrears that need support, and we continue to work with OACH to address those files. Late payers wouldn't be captured here.
Correct. So that's a very serious arrears situation where you're now in deep water compared to, you call it, what did you call it? Arrears missing, or you had a phrase for that?
Status.
Late payer status. And where would you draw that line internally? Is it 2 months, 3 months before it becomes you're getting in deep trouble?
So
I
through the
understand you want to
chair,
work with people without them getting the letter and saying you're going to be evicted. That's pretty startling to get them.
through the chair, we're continuing to work to address arrears as early as possible because we find it most successful to do so. I would say it isn't necessarily a time period where we sort of draw the line. Sometimes it's an amount, sometimes it's a breach. So we go back to OACH as soon as we can. I think it's on a case-by-case basis, but the TSCs typically understand their clientele and who they work with, and so individuals that typically pay late aren't necessarily captured in the arrears collection process formally.
Great. So you've got a grade 8. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other questions? I certainly hope we take full advantage of the rent bank and that tenants that are in arrears. So I hope that's a priority for OACH, if I understand you're the ones that are processing the applications. Okay, I'm hoping it's a priority.
I could just say, Adele, if you want to know, they actually just extended our ability to make applications. So they've actually trained all the early resolution officers, and hopefully by the end of this year, they'll all actually have direct access to make the application. So right now we have somebody else. They're being triaged through neighborhood information posts. But by the end of the year, we'll be doing the direct applications on behalf of tenants with them. So we are committed that this will be offered to every tenant who is eligible that comes through our office.
Perfect. Okay. Are there any other?
One more question. Is this a one-off? So if you refer a tenant this month, can they be referred again in 3 months?
I think it's every 12 months, $5,000 in the report.
Once a year.
Yeah, once a year to a max of 5. Are there any other questions? Okay, can I have a motion to receive the report from OACH? Vanita. And can I have a seconder? John, thank you. All in favor? Perfect, thank you. I did notice you don't use OACH approach, and now it's the OACH process. We will move on to item 13B. I understand there's a presentation on this.
Through the chair, we're happy to not do the presentation
great.
and go direct to However, there is a deputation, but we're happy to open it up to questions.
No, there is a deputation, and if I can move to that, thank you. I don't know who was doing the presentation, but I appreciate their consideration of the time delay. So it is Catherine Wilkinson, who is deputing on 13B, the security video surveillance policy.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm also very excited about the significant difference the rent bank will have on our tenants' ability to recoup arrears. So talking about the security video surveillance policy, you know, as a champion of reinstating CCTV access to frontline operations staff, I'm really pleased to see that this access has been restored. From a tenant's perspective, tenants need to know that staff have their backs when incidents occur on the properties and can determine the most appropriate course of action. On page 2 of the policy, under scope, it says it does not apply to tenants using video surveillance systems. And this kind of raises a bit of a red flag for me because I was not aware tenants are permitted to use video surveillance cameras on Toronto community housing property. I think this should be addressed in the policy. And while this is a corporate policy, we understand that. We know that on an almost daily basis, tenants will be referred to this policy when seeking access to footage. On page 6, under inquiries from the public, I'm encouraging the board to ask management to include clear, specific, straightforward language indicating for privacy reasons, staff cannot permit tenant access to CCTV surveillance footage at any time. Cost of maintenance and repairs for the CCTV equipment. Millions of dollars have been invested in upgrading cameras and the related equipment, and it's important to ensure that these systems are in good working condition and that failures are reported and repaired in a timely manner. I still hear rumblings from various tenants being told some CCTV cameras are not working. To allow the board to do its due diligence and understand the associated costs related to this equipment, it would seem prudent to provide this report annually to the board so they have confidence that maintenance, repairs, and replacements of CCTV cameras and equipment are completed within reasonable timelines and fully operational. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Catherine. Are there any questions or comments? I know we do get a CSU report annually, so can I have a motion to approve the security video surveillance policy? Benita, John, seconder, thank you very much. All in favor? Okay, the policy has been approved. We will move on to item number 4, which is the ongoing opportunities and challenges between TCHC and the Office of the Commissioner of Housing Equity. And we have 2 deputants on this. So Catherine, you're first.
Yes, and I'm happy to report my final.
This is the last item. So there's nothing left to depute on.
Right? This report highlights the truly collaborative working relationship between OACH and Toronto Community Housing as they work to improve compliance with the arrears collections process and in keeping our tenants housed. If there is conflict between the 2 parties, there's an existing resolutions process within the terms of reference where either party can contact the City of Toronto Service Manager who will provide independent and impartial advice. From a governance perspective, the board provides an oversight role while management is responsible for the day-to-day operations. As OACH is an independent accountability office, it appears we may be blurring the lines a little with this board report. There is a distinct difference between being collaborative and being a part of the team. And the OACH needs to be collaborative while maintaining its integrity and independence. I understand tenant service coordinators do not want their arrears files to be audited in perpetuity. However, the intent of OACH was for Toronto Community Housing to learn to address tenant arrears in the early stages to prevent them from escalating, and if accomplished, the OACH would be out of business. OACH has been in place now for 10 years. Toronto Community Housing arrears are hovering at the $30 million mark, which suggests the services of OACH are needed now more than ever, particularly when it comes to the expertise in tackling the complex arrears files. The OACH approach, we know, is a unique case management process to arrears resolution, and this has led to significant reduction in tenant arrears, stabilizing tenancies, and Toronto Community Housing recouping millions of dollars in lost revenue that would not otherwise have been possible. We now know this approach cannot be replicated at Toronto Community Housing, as the tenant service coordinators have many administrative responsibilities, and managing arrears is only one of them. As a landlord, we can take pride in knowing that the majority of our tenants are paying their rent on time. So going forward, this report illustrates that there are many new opportunities in the works, like the rent bank, that are being pursued by OACH and Toronto Community Housing that will result in faster resolution of arrears, which is great news for our tenants, Toronto Community Housing, Toronto Seniors Housing, and OACH. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Catherine. And Kathy Birch is the next deputant, or our last deputant.
Is it on?
Yes.
I'm here today as an original member of the External Advisory Committee that was put together by the then CEO of Toronto Community Housing that created the Commissioner of Housing Equity's office. Because I think it's important for you to know the history, and most of the people sitting at this table now were not associated with Toronto Community Housing at that time. So it's important to know why OACH was created and why it came to be, and why the processes were put in place. So I'm here to just give you some institutional memory. And this was based on the Lesage report that happened back in 2009 with the death of a gentleman who was 82 years old, Al Gosling, who was a former tenant who had been evicted from Toronto Community Housing due to rental arrears that accumulated after him being charged market rent because his annual review had not been submitted in time, and he went through this whole chaos of through the shelter and all of that. And the investigation showed that our staff was not collecting rents and calculating them correctly and collecting them in a timely way, and that tenants didn't feel safe even talking to some of our staff, and it just wasn't being applied consistently. So all of OACH came about for a real reason, and it had to happen, and it was all based on the commissioner's office and recommendation. At the time when we set this office up and it got started, they were really good at collecting the money quickly. And you got to understand, staff of asset management, which is what they were called at that time, they resented the OACH office because they were collecting the money that they couldn't get done, and they were showing that they were not doing their jobs as efficiently and consistently and correctly. And so they resented it because they thought it was a punishment to have that office. So the staff that are now TSCs probably were not there back in the day. So while you consider the opinions and the results of this, you have to keep it in mind. Where we were then, where we are now, has it gotten better? Is the OACH approach a real thing? No, it's an approach. I'm old, I stay stuck in my trail, thank you. And it works. Training our newer staff to that so that they get as good at it as the commissioner's office, absolutely. There's still a real reason for that commissioner's office to be in place. And those new processes, as they've evolved, as OACH has learned by being out, tenants felt safer with OACH. They weren't being verbally bullied as Toronto Community Housing staff had been. They were more approachable. They weren't in their faces every minute of the day and all of that. So just as you read this report, I need you to remember where we were then, why the office was created, why it's been so successful, and we need to continue to learn from them and teach our staff. So please listen to them, help them get better. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any comments as it relates to this report? John?
So I didn't know the whole story of Al Gosling. I find that very interesting because it really, I mean, I'd heard the name before, but I'd never known the reason. I knew that he became homeless, but I didn't realize that it came about as, due to some gaps in the system, and there was some misunderstandings and improper information. So it's good to know that. So thank you. It's good.
Paula?
Fill in a couple of gaps. He died in the stairwell. He had not filled he was a pensioner, and he had to fill paperwork out. He was vulnerable and he didn't do it, so he got his rent changed, and then he got evicted, and then he went to the hospital, and he ended up coming back and dying in Arletta Manor. So that was an investigation that the board of TCHC asked Lesage to do this investigation, and we came up with this notion of assisting the vulnerable tenants and long-time arrears. We also, just FYI everybody, that in 2008, and I think this happened in 2009, there was a change in management, operations in buildings, where the seniors buildings were felt to be, Kathy, you might remember that, easy to manage. And so the caretakers were asked to do all of the paperwork instead of a specialist. And that's when the caretaker wasn't able to do the paperwork with Mr. Gosling. So that was a cost-cutting direction that didn't work out very well, and now we have this new system. So I'm just adding to whoever said that, I think it was you, John, went into that. I'm just adding a little bit more because I was on that board at that time, and Kathy was there too. And the board was given the new, anyway, the board wasn't consulted very well on the new operational model, and it wasn't a great model.
Thank you. Are there any other comments? Can I ask a question? Oh, sorry. Oh, yes, go ahead.
So I get, the question is, I guess it's for Melanie and it's for Nadia, and it's in regard to the commentary about exceptional circumstances. So, a file goes to the, it goes to the OACH, and they find that it's worth working on because there were exceptional circumstances, and the staff feels that, they'd gone through all the processes and that there are not exceptional circumstances. And I'm just wondering if you can just shed some light on this. How prevalent is it, and what are some examples of exceptional circumstances that are not being recognized by staff?
Thank you. So through the chair, so right now the way the process works is after OACH brokers a repayment agreement, it goes back to TCHC and the TSC to monitor. If the tenant breaches in the first month, they're required to contact the tenant to see if they can get them back on track. If they're unable to, they refer it to OACH, and then we're actually the ones that are determining exceptional circumstances. And when we're determining that, we're looking to see whether something materially changed or there was some type of hardship since the first time we worked with them, and only then would we broker a second repayment agreement. The internal processes at OACH is that I actually have to sign off on it because I want to ensure consistency across all regions, and that it's only being given to the tenants that actually need it. And I can tell you, of the breaches sent to us, only 20% are usually found to have exceptional circumstances. It's a low number. So to address this, perhaps we could work with TCHC to give them, as part of training, a better understanding of what we're determining as exceptional circumstances, or give them an understanding. We do put it in our reports, so we do identify the reasons for the exceptions and how many we find that way in our biannual reports, but perhaps we can include it in our dashboards or in a different way to triage it down more to frontline staff so they're understanding the reasons.
Okay, thanks.
And through the chair, I would only add that based on the anecdotal feedback we got from staff, I think conceptually the problem is bigger for the frontline staff in terms of perception than in reality in the numbers. And I think we could solve this with communication, to Melanie's point. And I do think there's an opportunity for us to better inform the management and frontline staff so we understand when it's used and how it's used so we could better address it.
Are there any, Paula?
Maybe I should know this already, but once you have frontline staff working with somebody, that people that are in arrears aren't always in great shape either. Just you're upset, everything, we know what that's like. Is there a second tier? In other words, I'll just call it a lead hand. So if you're the frontline staff and you're grappling with that, maybe you're sending it to OACH, or is there a lead hand there where it goes to that person next who can maybe deal with more complex tenancies easily, and maybe they're in a different job classification, that would mean it wouldn't go directly to the OACH?
So through the chair, absolutely. We have a role called Community Service Coordinator, Access and Support, and they provide case management support, particularly with vulnerable tenancies. So in the new ACP, we're formally mapping in their role and ensuring that they're engaged in the process to engage with the tenancy before we include OACH. So that would be more of a social worker type staff that actually is able to go and meet with the family and the tenancy. So we're formally mapping in their role to ensure that the TSCs have the support they need on the ground. So absolutely.
And be clear when that would go there, be clear when that would go to escalate it to the OACH. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? I had a question about this relationship that you referenced with Wood Green, and what the connection is with the CRA and who's preparing these tax returns, and is this proprietary software that Wood Green has, or what's?
Thank you. So through the chair, it's a service Wood Green provides to low-income households across the city, and it's where they have a volunteer program where they support tenants to file taxes, and they work directly with the CRA. So their employees have a direct link to the CRA, and they're working with them, and it's simple tax returns that they're completing.
Oh, okay. So back in the day, when I worked at Clarkson Gordon, we used to, you had to get your tax hours, you had to volunteer, and I went to the, excuse me, the Gladstone Library. So that's the service that, okay, so it's not Wood Green, okay.
No,
not Wood Green doing these tax returns. Pardon? Sorry?
Facilitating the
Yeah,
process.
okay, I understand now. And I asked for this report, and I would like to commend you, because this is a fulsome and, most importantly, a balanced report. And as Kathy indicated, it's about teaching the TSCs how to do their job better. But the volume is with the TSCs. That's where the legwork, and so this process has to work for them, and it has to be practical, and it has to be something that they can implement on a timely basis. And so I do think that engagement, you have to hear what the TSCs have to say, and there is an element of maintaining the respect that the tenants give to the TSCs and their job, and I think that that's really important. So I appreciate that it's a balanced report, and there's still work to be done. And I thank you very much for engaging and working together, because this is supposed to be a constructive process. I know you have an oversight role, but just pointing out errors to people, you don't get results that way, right? And that's the whole point of this. So thank you very much. Yo, Nadia?
So through the chair, I just wanted to acknowledge the hard work of the frontline staff. I think oftentimes the TSC's work is only reflected in challenges through this report and in the operational performance measures report, but it is a group of staff that actively work hard every day. They're in our communities, they're supporting our hubs, dealing with safety concerns at times, and I want to acknowledge the hard work of that team and their supervisors and managers in continuing to keep our arrears as low as possible. Year to date, we are up $100,000 in arrears in rent and parking current over last year, December, and that is a testament to the ongoing work of that team and the support of OACH, so I wanted to acknowledge that.
Yes, and the board appreciates it. And I hope they feel that they've been heard through this process, because I do think it is important. It's not just you reporting to us on what they're doing, and it does become just reporting on errors. So I hope they feel that they've been heard. So if there are no other questions, can I have a motion to receive this report? Benita, thank you. John, seconder. All in favor? Thank you very much. And if there's no other business to come before the public meeting of TCHC, I would like to, okay, Nick, he beat you. A motion to adjourn. Seconder, all in favor? Thank you very much.